Hey guys, tonight we slide into a soft-lit Greek courtyard where nothing explodes and everything matters only as much as your next breath. The lamp is low and honey-colored, the air cool like a clay jug from shade, and your fan back in the real room writes small circles of white noise that gently tidy up the day. Quick reality check. You probably won't survive this thrilling level of calm. You will, heroically, fall asleep before the Minotaur even checks his email. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're settling in, drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always cozy to see where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You breathe, and the room answers with a hush you can almost touch. Lamps low, fan on exactly how you planned in your head, and a simple myth starts to unspool the way linen slides off a loom clean, even unhurried. You aren't in a museum or a battlefield. You're in a small Athenian courtyard that smells faintly of green and pepper, like grass after rain, with a polite almond wave from somewhere in the back. A cat rehearses slow gymnastics along a roof beam. Not to impress anyone, just because gravity enjoys a challenge. The lime-washed wall beside you has kept the day's heat the way a friend keeps a secret holding it, then handing it back gentler. A lamp wick sips, a flame nods, and a puddle of gold rests on stone as if light could sit cross-legged. You're not here for heroics. You're here for the kind of cleverness that whispers. Tonight's myth is boring in the classic, useful way. Like bread, it shows up, tastes like yes, and keeps your life moving. Athena, patron of crafts, doesn't kick doors. She notices hinges. She hears the creak that says the wood is thinking. She feels how a rope translates a tug into a promise. That's wisdom you can nap to the kind that makes a home run smoother and a night run longer. Your shoulders descend a tax bracket, and you breathe like a person who has remembered the off switch. A mainstream truth pads in on soft paws. Olive oil fuels lamps like this one. A little clay body holds the reservoir. A wick drinks. The room gets that straw-colored steadiness that forgives every unfinished chore. The flame behaves like a considerate guest. No popping, no drama, just company. It fits the hush the way your fan hum fits your room background kindness. You could read a few lines by it, or decide that tomorrow exists and let the page be tomorrow's problem. Either way, the light approves. You hear a sound and almost miss it. Wood speaks in syllables: creak, settle, creak. Somewhere just beyond the lamplight, a frame waits, timbers pegged together, rope braided from fiber and patience. A crossbeam that understands leverage better than most committee meetings. You tilt your ear and learn that every useful thing has a small voice. A spindle whispers. A treadle thuds like a distant heartbeat. A press, if that's what this is, offers a low, practical hymn. Your own breath falls into step with it, steady as a footpath. Not everything in the story is perfectly labeled, and that's fine. Historians still argue whether the tale of Athena's first olive in Athens preserves a deep Bronze Age memory of a sacred tree, or whether it was polished later as a classical civic myth to explain why the city prefers wisdom to waves. The disagreement can live in daylight. Tonight, you keep to what your senses give you: cool clay, warm light, wood that thinks in creaks, and your body turning mercifully into a very convincing pillow. There's also the kitchen corner wisdom people pass along sailors. Some say, would drip a little oil over the side to calm a choppy patch of water, smoothing small waves into quiet. Later writers mention it, and old-timers nod like it's obvious. You file it under likely charming. Do not attempt in storms. Someone's aunt swears crushed bay leaves in oil keep mosquitoes polite. That belongs to the same shelf folk notes with a friendly shrug. Either way, the picture is soothing: a clay cup, a few fragrant leaves, and light you can pour. Meanwhile, your hands rest in your lap with amphora energy stable, curved, content. The lamp continues its quiet job, bright enough to outline your knuckles, dim enough to let your thoughts unclasp and lie down. A small breeze tastes the flame. It bows, then stands again with the resilient etiquette you admire. Remember the dramatic warning about not surviving this calm time for a heroic comeback. Your event in the Bedtime Olympics is not checking your phone. The gold medal is basically pre-polished. Silver goes to not replaying that conversation from noon. Bronze to remembering you already set the alarm. You look toward the shadow where the frame waits. If the world were louder, you'd miss it. But the night offers you every small sound on a cushion. Rope fibers realign with a soft twang. Wood exhales somewhere below. Perhaps a shallow trough waits for the first dark mash of fruit, the stain of work that will become light. You are in no hurry to see it. Patience is the main ingredient here, and you've got a full jar. Your fan keeps looping its halo, and the lamp's golden puddle on the wall keeps its friendly shape like a dog that has learned stay. The myth feels less like a spectacle and more like a domestic tutorial, which is its charm. Divine attention in this scene is simply the skill of noticing what simple parts can do together. A beam, a peg, a stone, a rope-patient teammates. Athena's gift is not just the tree, but the way to listen to it. You can almost hear her voice at a quiet angle. Place your weight here. Let time do its work. Don't force it. It's the kind of advice that works on olives and, inconveniently, on your to-do list. Yes, patience is free. No, you cannot speed run it. One more inventory of the courtyard on the ledge. A shallow dish of soaking olives clouding the water with their green confidence. On the bench, a folded strip of linen that smells like sun and salt. On the wall, a shadow that looks exactly like a story, leaning in to be told. Your thumb rests on a small stamp, an owl, and you imagine the clay, taking a little warmth from you now and returning it later, long after you've drifted. Objects are patient like that. They pass along comfort at the speed of trust. Beyond the wall, the city speaks in gentle mechanics. A vendor slides a shutter. That's the same note as the beam. A dog turns in a circle and sighs like an old leather sandal. That's percussion. If you drew the town by sound, it would be wood, rope, clay, breath, a four-piece band tuned to E for evening. You smile barely because this is your kind of concert. The ticket price is drowsiness, and you are absolutely paid up. Somewhere a cup touches stone with the tiniest click, a percussionist clearing their throat. Back in your real room, The fan continues its little miracle, riding circles into the air, and you follow the pattern without trying to read it. The myth is already doing what you needed, lowering the lights inside your head. No cliffhangers, no urgent riddles, just the friendly choreography of a place where tools sing in their sleep. If wisdom wears armor by day, by night she wears a shawl and slippers and goes around tightening the gentle screws of the universe so nothing rattles. Your eyelids practice closing like stage curtains that have decided to retire early. Nothing here needs solving. The press waits. The goddess waits. Even the cat waits. Now a neat loaf on the beam. You wait with all of them, companionably. In a minute, you'll lean a little closer to that creak and learn the alphabet of pressure. For now, you breathe, and the breath returns. And that is the whole point. Tonight, dull on purpose is beautiful on purpose. The golden puddle of lamplight holds its shape. Your gaze grows heavy and kind, and the courtyard keeps you the way linen keeps a fold easy, inevitable, and ready for the next gentle move. You take the chalky road before the sun decides what kind of day it wants to be, and the dust accepts you like an extra footstep it has been saving. Your sandals lift pale puffs that settle on your shins, a soft veil the color of crushed seashell. The air holds two flavors at once: dry thyme from the low hills and a shy lick of salt from the water, and they meet on your tongue like acquaintances who nod but don't hug. You keep the slow rhythm you learned from last night's patient creak of wood. Your body remembers that steady hinge of sound and copies it in your stride. A quiet metronome you don't have to think about. The lamp's honey light has faded to memory, but the calm it poured into you stays, like warmth in a stone long after the sun steps away. The track throws little glints where mica peeks from the dirt, and the ground tilts, then levels. The way a cat stretches and decides against leaving the windowsill. A goat looks up from a bush with a square, reasonable face and two tinkling bells that have agreed to be percussion, but not melody. Another scuffs pebbles, discovers the moral consequences of physics, and pretends it meant to do that. You pass and give a polite nod, shared membership in the society of creatures just walking somewhere. The bells fall into your pace and politely refuse to do more than that. It suits you. You left cliffhangers behind with your shoes by the door. Athens yawns ahead, the Acropolis still a silhouette, with a pin of lamplight where someone woke early. Here's your mainstream anchor, tucked under the eyelid of morning. The city sits on a rocky outcrop on the Attic Peninsula by the Saronic Gulf, a place where land paths meet sea lanes like a well-planned recipe. People put down amphorae here and pick up ideas. They soak olives and argue with equal dedication. For now, the streets are more broom than trumpet. A shutter slides, a door sighs, and morning peeks out like a cautious turtle. You drift toward it at the speed of a patient thought. The smell of bread finds you in stages: first the husk, then the damp sweetness, then the singe where a crust thinks it's tougher than it is. A baker draws a paddle like an oar and launches loaves as if the oven were a small glowing harbor. Harbor heat brushes your forearms, cousin to the warmth those lime-washed walls kept last night. You remember that lamp's straw-colored mercy, forgiving every unfinished chore. This scent forgives them too. with sesame gossip and steam. If you're auditioning for the event called Not Checking Your Phone, this is performance fuel. Your training regimen is mostly remembering you already set the alarm. To your left, the hills lift pale shoulders, Hymettus thinking about bees and time. Pentelic marble, imagining futures as colonnades. The path crunches with that satisfying cereal sound, and your calves agree to wake up without bargaining. You pause to tie a sandal. The knot remembers the rope from that waiting wooden frame, and your fingers imitate last night's craft of patience. An old man nods and says that good knots and good sleep are cousins. You accept this as peer-reviewed advice, smile with minimal effort, and keep that small wisdom in your pocket beside your flask. At a bend, the wind arrives with news gulls arguing like small lawyers over nothing, tar warming on boats, fish scales flashing silver confetti. Salt sits on your lips and reminds you to sip from the clay flask at your hip. When you do, the water tastes like shade. Someone rubbed a little oil around the stopper so it wouldn't squeak, and the bottle answers in a friendly hush. It's a domestic miracle friction resolved by fruit. You consider anointing your to-do list with the same method, but decide to keep the miracle where it belongs. There's an anecdote people repeat along these roads that shepherds can forecast weather by how their goats nose the ground, or by an instant when the bells go shy all at once. It's charming and not particularly attested. You file it with last night's notion of smoothing waves with a drop of oil. Still, you catch yourself listening when the breeze shifts and the clinking pauses. Maybe the herd is reading a headline you can't see. Maybe they're just chewing over philosophy. Either way, it's restful to think someone else is monitoring the sky. You cross a trickle, really just a suggestion of a stream on a sheet of flat stones. Your sandal slaps. A frog considers objecting and chooses diplomacy. Along the bank, wild fennel stands like a crowd of green feather dusters, and a grasshopper throws itself into your path with theatrical commitment and zero follow-through. You continue with the grave dignity of a person whose prime athletic event is not checking your phone, a discipline with one medal and no judges. Second event, walking at the pace of consent. As you crest a rise, the city gathers itself rooftops like terracotta book spines, lanes like dog-eared margins. The Acropolis, a stern librarian who hasn't opened the doors yet. Historians still argue whether the route later called the Panathenaic Way already followed this line through the early Potter's Quarter or braided elsewhere before the Classical Age made a parade of it. You don't need a map to enjoy uncertainty. Your feet are content to follow the path that keeps appearing exactly when you need it. Like a page turning itself. A cart rattles by, polite as a porch swing. The driver lifts 2 fingers in greeting, and you see jars strapped snugly clay bodies with rope harnesses. Your own amphora energy from last night made literal in terracotta. The jars bump and settle with the composure of experienced travelers. A dog trots behind, convinced this is its cart, and you nearly agree. The animal stops to read a detailed news article written on a tuft of grass. You give them privacy and continue at the speed of common sense. Another mainstream note tucks itself into the morning olive oil here is currency food, fuel, medicine, polish, and prize. Athenians anoint athletes with it, cook with it, light with it, pay temple dues with it, and store it in jars stamped with owls. Your thumb finds a similar stamp on your flask and imagines the chain of hands that brought it here. Potter, kiln, merchant, porter, you. None of them rush. Rushing is for storms and stories with drum solos. This one prefers a low hum. The path threads past a small shrine where Laurel leans into lamplight that hasn't quite given up. Someone left a twist of wool and a handful of olives, with a shallow saucer of oil that is half prayer, half practical lamp refill. An elderly woman taps the rim with a fingernail, a clear bell that sounds like agreement. She tells you confidentially that if you tuck a fresh olive leaf in your sandal strap, you'll walk farther without blisters. That tidbit is friendly, folkloric, and not heavily footnoted. You enjoy the idea anyway and tuck the leaf in like a secret. Down the slope, the harbor makes a brushed metal sound as the breeze licks the surface. A fisherman rubs a line between thumb and forefinger, checks for fray, and touches a little oil to the fibers. The line sighs like a relieved instrument string. You remember that night lesson about Athena noticing hinges, not doors, and decide to notice small pivots too, the way a pebble rolls when you place your heel, the way your breath widens when you see a patch of shade and know it's yours for 12 steps. Children roll a hoop, and the hoop obediently demonstrates the philosophy of circles keep going. They shout greetings that are 50% words, 50% helium, and wave as if your job is to be a landmark. You perform the role with grace. One carries a tiny crust of bread, dabbed with oil and oregano. The scent drifts toward you and casually solves problems you weren't even having. Someone laughs, and the laugh sounds like a small amphora being set down gently hollow, cheerful, sure of its place. You approach a gate that is more suggestion than wall, a couple of posts, a lazy rope, a man who has decided his stool is sufficient architecture. He nods. You nod. Bureaucracy is satisfied. Just inside, a woman brushes a courtyard with twigs, and the sound is exactly the soft shush your fan made, only translated into daylight. She glances at your sandals and says, without stopping, that good roads are made by good feet returning. You promise to return with the same unhurried expectations. And the broom approves. A market corner begins to set itself out olives in bins green like moonlit pistachios, black like polished stone, wrinkled like grandmothers who have learned how to laugh at invoices. A man cracks one to show you the bitter milk that wants to be something else. He tells you it will take brine and time. You respect both. Another table offers little clay lamps with owl eyes, the same friendly shape that kept you company last night. You turn one in your hand. It is warm from the sun already, and the thumbprint at its neck feels like someone else's steady heartbeat. The street drifts upward, then settles into a stretch where light pools kindly in the dust like spilled silk. A cat you met earlier, or its legal representative, materializes and escorts you 3 doors, charges nothing, and resigns with dignity. You think about the long version of calm, how a road can teach it, footstep by footstep. You also think, briefly, about the countless steps you've taken not looking at a screen, and award yourself a laurel that is mostly a leaf in your sandal. Achievement unlocked. 0 notifications. Near a wall, a young man experiments with a lever under a heavy stone. The way children test a seesaw by sitting at different distances from the center. The stone lifts, then rests. He grins. And you see the delight that starts most useful things, not thunder. Just, oh, you keep walking, carrying that small vowel with you. It fits in the pocket with your flask and your patience. Somewhere a door hinge answers with a tiny purr that would make the goddess proud. A quiet callback to last night's wooden council. Here and there, pots of thyme and rosemary make little green hands that bless your knees as you pass. A honey seller lays out comb that looks like a window full of amber weather. She tells you, in the tone of someone who knows the bees personally, that a smear of oil on the wrist keeps the honey scent from clinging while you work. Advice of the anecdotal, aunt-approved variety accepted gladly, with no obligation to cite. You buy a fingertip of sweetness and feel the morning go from good to forgiving. The city's breath deepens. From a courtyard, a lyre finds a scale and climbs it like sunlight up a wall. Somewhere a potter's wheel hums, cousin to the fan, hum you left behind, translating air into steadiness. The dust on your shins has become a respectable patina. You brush it with the back of your hand and leave a pale streak, the way a cloud writes one sentence across the morning and then edits it out. You realize that the road has been teaching you the same lesson as the lamp besteady. Be small, be kind to the hours. By the time you reach the neighborhood that faces the slopes, the day has chosen brightness but not heat. A clerk with a ledger the size of a sandwich squints and checks something off with ceremonial gravity. Perhaps he, too, has mastered not checking his phone, though his version uses a reed pen and stubborn optimism. The gulls have downgraded their litigation to mediation. The goat bells fade into a pleasant rumor. Your steps keep their pledge quiet, regular, useful. If the road had a summary, it would be this: simple things have voted to cooperate. Your breath, the breeze, the slope, the small opinions of gravel. Everything is content to help you arrive without comment. You're almost inside the city now, and the only ambition you feel is to keep this pace, to carry lamp-lit patience into daylight. Every creak in the world has softened into willingness. Every footstep is a nod from the earth saying, "Go on." The way is simple. You do. And the morning lengthens like cloth drawn smooth across a table, ready for whatever gentle work comes next. Shade finds you before conversation does, and you accept the invitation. The olive's canopy is a soft sieve that lets the morning down in sifted coins, silver on the undersides like dusk rehearsing at noon. When a breeze edits the branches, those little mirrors signal in slow syllables, and bees answer with a hum that stitches the quiet into something wearable. You press your palm to the trunk. Dry ridges meet you, cool and faintly resinous. The bark smelling of pepper and green almond. Calm arrives the way lamplight pooled last night gently, and with no need to explain itself. The air tastes greener here, pepper, hay, a polite sweetness. Temperature drops by half a step, as if the shade knows not to startle. Dust settles into low relief. and fallen leaves curve like a fleet of tiny boats ready to ferry your thoughts across a shallow channel to drowsiness. One leaf rides your sandal strap right where you tucked a leaf at the shrine and claims diplomatic immunity. The ground is patient. Your breathing copies it, long and even, ribs moving like a well-tuned bellows you don't have to supervise. You stand very still and let the tree do the action. The bees patrol the blossom clusters with the calm of professionals on salary, and their drone performs the same chore your fan did, sanding away the edges of thinking. A lizard sprints the runway of a sunlit stone and freezes as if it has misplaced its next line. Beyond the grove, a goat bell makes one comment and retires from public life union rules satisfied. You vote again for not checking your phone and win by a landslide, unopposed and gloriously untelevised. A mainstream truth settles beside you without clearing its throat. Olive trees live long centuries, often more ruddy elders that shrug at drought and answer injury with fresh shoots. In Athens, certain trees, the Morii, are counted and protected. City and tree share old paperwork. Somewhere on the Acropolis, out of sight, but not out of mind, the sacred olive is said to have stood, and, after fires, to have sprouted again, green as a second breath. The story fits the shade simple, useful, and stubbornly hopeful. Historians still argue whether the sacred olive reported to have risen after those fires is the very organism later tended for generations, or a ceremonial successor planted to knit the city's nerves back together. You don't need the verdict to feel the continuity trunk to palm, leaf to light, patience to patience. Lineage here is a braid botany, ritual, and the human habit of telling steadiness about itself until steadiness believes it. You take another slow breath, and the bees adjust the harmony by a fraction, as if congratulating you on remembering how to be a mammal. Around shoulder height, you find a knot smooth as a river stone. The wood remembers the pressure of wind the way your thumb remembers the weight of amphora clay from the market. Everything this morning has rhymed on purpose: ropes on boats, ropes on presses, grain in the baker's paddle, grain in the bark, oil on a lamp wick, oil coaxing a door hinge to be reasonable. You lean more of your weight in and feel how the trunk refuses to budge and also somehow moves with you. A partner who leads by standing still. Anecdotal, less attested tidbit from Grove gossip: tuck an olive leaf beneath your pillow and dreams behave. Rub a twist of olive wood along the doorframe and visiting rumors limp instead of sprint. You file both beside the oil drop-on waves story and the sandal leaf trick, charming domestic magic. Aunt certified, historian agnostic. Still, you picture the small shine on a lintel and smell pepper green as talk softens into kindness, like bread dipping into oil until the crust goes gentle at the edges. A child with a fig-sized basket steps past, working for the Ministry of Small Tasks. They count olives aloud, skip two by accident, and correct with solemn pride. You stay still as a favor to the shade, because the man with the handcart said shade is a loan repaid by gentleness. Bees change key by a breath width. The harmony thickens around you until it feels like a shawl. Your shoulders lower another tax bracket. The courtyard hush from last night seems to have learned Greek and moved outdoors. translating your fan's white noise into wings. Another mainstream note adds itself prized oil is stored in stamped amphorae owls, impressed at the clay necks like signatures, and awarded in games to athletes who glisten, then scrape their skin with strigils. Tidy curls of dust and oil dropping like punctuation. You sip from your own owl-stamped flask and taste cool clay, then touch the stopper with a thumb slicked in habit. The micro creak of leather hushes, and satisfaction arrives in miniature the soft click a hinge makes when it decides to be reasonable. You circle the tree and find a healed scar where a branch once shrugged off lightning or time. The wood swelled around loss and made sculpture of it, crescent-shaped like a sleepy eye. You trace its rim as if reading a coastline and catch motes floating in a shaft of sun indoor snow in summer. Drifting with no ambition, steady as a footpath, you think, remembering the road dust and the baker's steam, and how both decided not to hurry you. The tree approves by continuing to be a tree and declining all invitations to drama. Remember the lamp's honey pool on the wall. The leaves remake that light in moving pieces, flicker-fed and kind. A speckled pattern lands on your forearm and reheats, cools, reheats as the canopy breathes. It's the same choreography as last night's wick and your room fan's halo, except the soundtrack has wings. You consider applying for permanent residency in this patch of shade. The application consists of doing exactly what you're doing and promising to keep your notifications asleep until after the bees clock out. From the edge of hearing a lyre testing a scale, a pot lid settling, the ledger clerk scratching his stylus at a measured geologic rate. The city's gentle bureaucracy hums along, but here, the only paperwork is ring upon ring inside the trunk time's slow minutes. You don't see them, but you feel their vote. The ground smells faintly of clean dust and crushed leaf, and when you rub a leaf between finger and thumb, a floral metal green rises, somewhere between meadow and workshop, promise and tool. Another passerby pauses, sets down a small amphora with a practiced hollow cluck, and fans his face with a reed. He nods at the shade and says that a good tree is a good neighbor. You nod back, ambassador of your temporary address. When he lifts the jar, the rope harness creaks in a friendly way, cousin to the wooden hymn you've been hearing since last night. You have begun to like how tools and trees share a dialect patient, sturdy, fond of verbs like press, mend, carry, and stay. It is a vocabulary you can nap inside. You give yourself one tiny assignment. Notice what the tree notices. It notices light migrating, shadows turning pages, the tremor of a bird landing and leaving again. It notices weight be weight, your hands weight, the breeze like a sigh someone forgot to finish. And it notices patience, which is not the absence of action, but the presence of rhythm. The bees keep the beat, the leaves run the melody, the trunk holds the bass line. If music had elbows, it would lean on this bark and listen to itself. You decide not to measure the moment. If the tree keeps time, it does it in rings you cannot see and in olives that start as secrets. You keep time by the way the light crawls along a particular knot and then steps down to the next. When you take your hand from the bark, a dust ghost of your touch stays for an instant and drifts away. The olive keeps its counsel, the city breathes, and somewhere a frame, stones, rope. Patience waits without impatience for hands to ask it for help. You let that thought hover like a bee over a blossom, and, with the slow permission of shade, you breathe again. You pluck one firm green bead and do the bravest thing you'll do all day, you bite it. For 3 heroic seconds you think, "Oh, peppery nice." And then the olive explains a class you did not sign up for. Your tongue goes chalkboard, your gums stage a walkout. Water, as a concept, seems like propaganda. You make the elegant face of someone trying very hard not to look like they've licked a battery. The nearest goat looks over, sympathetic but unsurprised, the way a seasoned barista watches a tourist drink espresso like it's hot chocolate. You manage a discreet, courteous disposal behind a stone and breathe again, chastened and awake. A woman with the authority of 1,000 jars laughs softly. "Raw is for the tree," she says, "and patience is for us." She lifts a wicker basket whose bottom is already stained matte brown from earlier lessons, and you follow to a wash basin set under the shade you've befriended. The water there is cool, like a promise kept. She pours the olives in, swirls, and sluices away a greenish cloud. You can smell it pepper sharp, leafy. A hint of almond metal, like the bark under your palm earlier, only more insistent. She hands you a smooth stone. Your job is to crack each fruit with a tender tap. Not enough to shatter, just enough to open a door for time to walk through. It becomes a rhythm. Tap, shift, tap. The sound joins the bees. The goat bell, that distant potter's wheel, a percussion section hired by patience. Mainstream truth, tucked neatly into the basin's splash. The bitterness is a compound that keeps most creatures from treating olives as trail mix. People learn to invite it out with brine and thyme, sometimes with lye made from ash, sometimes with plain water, changes that ask only for diligence. Green olives are picked earlier, black ones have ripened longer on the tree. They're not different kinds of olive as much as different moments in the olive's long, stubborn sentence. You nod as if you knew this already. The woman sees through you kindly and nods anyway. She shows you the knife's gentle language score, each olive with 2 shy cuts. Slip them into water. Change that water when it clouds. The liquid goes pale tea, then slightly bitter, then less so. And every change is like rinsing the day out of your head, again and again, until thought stops squeaking. A clay jar waits with a shoulder you already trust, amphora energy, calm and curved, and a wide mouth for easy promises. Into it, she pours water kissed with salt, a handful of fennel fronds, a curl of citrus peel, 3 smashed garlic cloves that release their low thunder. The fragrance is kitchen lullaby. Pepper green meets meadow, meets the small bravery of garlic at 9 in the morning. There's a casual test she mentions in the same tone as that shrine keeper's sandal leaf advice. Some folks float an egg to judge the brine if it rises like a lazy moon. The salt is right. It's kitchen folklore friendly. Probably younger than people like to claim, but you enjoy it and glance around, half expecting the egg to appear like a Deus Ex chicken. Instead, she drops a laurel leaf on the surface because her aunt said it teaches the flavor to behave. Again, charming, less attested. You file it next to calming waves with a drop of oil. Your jar gets its leaf anyway, like a bookmark that also smells good. You watch her set a small pottery weight over a reed mat inside the mouth so all the olives stay under, baptized into patience. Up is mold, she says, and down is dinner. The reed creaks softly, cousin to last night's wooden hymn. You find that even watching someone else be deliberate slows your blood pressure by 2 polite notches. The tree above stipples your hands with light, and for a stitch second, you feel exactly like a jar yourself, steady, sealed, quietly becoming. Historians still argue whether Athenians first learned the cleverest curing tricks from seafaring neighbors to the east, or whether the know-how fermented locally, home by home, workshop by workshop. The debate is a gentle one tonight, no footnotes in the wind, so you let it pass like a boat along the horizon, visible, acknowledged, not urgent. What matters to your senses is the order of things score. Soak, salt, wait. You portion it to memory the way you portion a long exhale. Another mainstream anchor drops lightly. Jars like these will later sit in cool courtyards and storerooms, sealed with clay stoppers slicked with resin or wax to keep the talk of air out. The same resin the city likes to sip in wine, the same wax that forgives the clumsy. When the woman smooths the stopper into place, you hear a tiny kiss between clay and sealant, the same relieved whisper your flask made when you oiled its cork. Tools all speak that language when you treat them civilly. You resolve to be fluent while you wipe your hands on linen that smells like sun. A boy arrives with a wooden paddle the same shape bakers use, only miniature, as if built for a mouse bakery. He uses it to press the floating fennel back under, working with solemn pride. He tells you, with the candor of children, that if you stand over the jar and compliment it daily, the olives cure faster. This is an adorable peer-reviewed study with a sample size of 1 household and a control group of 0. Still, you try it. You are doing amazing. You whisper, and the brine makes one appreciative bubble that is pure coincidence and absolutely your new favorite superstition. There's a small shelf nearby with amphorae of finished oil, and you can't help comparing the golden placid liquid with the work in progress in your jar. Oil is the quiet adult at the party. Brining olives are the good kids on a road trip, learning patience and playlist etiquette. You remember that lamp from the first night, the way it held the room steady with a straw-colored halo, and you feel a little thrill imagining your own thumb-sized olives graduating from bitter to civil. The goat, a noted skeptic, chews a weed and declines to comment. You lean in and sniff the jar clean salt, green citrus, a whisper of fennel, the shy whisper of olive flesh that has stopped shouting and started listening. The smell reminds you of the harbor salt, rope, sun on clay, and you realize the cure is a sea in miniature, a managed tide over time. If patience had a flavor, it would taste like this: bright, friendly, slightly botanical, with a backbone that says, take your time. You plan an appetizer for a future you bred, torn by hand. Oil in a shallow plate, olives that make polite conversation instead of a hostage negotiation. The thought alone lowers your heart rate. Between tasks, The woman mentions a trick her grandmother liked: pack a few olives dry with salt in a basket and let them wrinkle like late-night laughter. Then brush the salt away and dress them in oil. It's another path to the same destination. Cousins in a family of methods. She shrugs. The international gesture for there are many good roads. You feel your stride from this morning echo the sentiment. Good feet returning make strong paths. The broom agrees from somewhere in the neighborhood, shushing the ground into readiness. You ask how long, because the human brain loves a countdown clock. She smiles the smile of weather and says, a week, or 3, or as long as it takes. Time here is not the loud kind on a stage. It's the quiet kind in a jar. She tells you to taste often and trust the mouth, exactly the mouth that earlier tried to resign. Redemption arc unlocked. In your not checking your phone training, this is the drill where you look at a wall and somehow learn about yourself. You're unexpectedly good at it. A cart rattles by, and the driver's amphorae knock gently together like old friends elbowing at a happy memory. The owl stamp appears on one neck and winks in shade. You touch the mark on your own flask and feel like part of a club you never applied to, but somehow joined by walking slowly and listening. Somewhere behind the houses, a loom thumps, and you think of Athena again, not scolding, not grand, just noticing that a small weight can do a lot of good if you place it with intention. The reed, the stone, the jar lid, your attention all tidy weights. For the record, your mouth has forgiven everyone. You try one of last season's olives from a clay dish, and it offers pepper meadow and a faint, friendly bite that says it remembers being fierce. You stand still and let the flavor describe the roomwood, shade, low voices, the fan hum translated into bees, the lamp's memory spreading like honey over everything. Your jaw relaxes. You could eat 2 more. You could also imagine them resting in a bowl beside soft bread and oil. Evening unspooling like linen again. Before you go, you look at the jar once more. It sits with the posture of a person who knows how to wait, shoulders down, breath low, no drama. The laurel leaf does its aunt-approved job of looking pretty and possibly nothing else. The egg, absent, nonetheless floats in story form. You tie your sandal leaf still tucked, superstition holding, and carry the taste of reasonable salt on your tongue. Patience is now a flavor you can name. The woman presses an extra olive into your palm, one already civilized, and you roll it between finger and thumb like a small planet that decided to be kind. You pocket the feeling, thank the room, and notice the press's patient silhouette through the slats, timbers, and rope. A crossbeam waiting. Not yet, says the day, but soon. You are content to rinse, to brine, to let time rehearse its lines. The jar breathes once, the bees agree, and the breeze turns a page as softly as a librarian who wants you to keep reading yourself to sleep. You pause at the doorway because the room itself is breathing. Looms exhale with a soft thump. Heddle bars whisper. Threads flick their tiny tails like minnows in a shallow pan of light. The creak you heard last night returns a friendly hinge, learning vowels, and you feel it tug your attention the way the fan hum tugged your thoughts into a round, harmless circle. Here, Wood and fiber speak the dialect of patience you've been collecting since the lamp's honey pooled on stone. You step inside as if entering a library where the books are busy making themselves. A woman stands at a warp-weighted loom, the kind your hands already understand by sympathy. Smooth clay weights dangle like a quiet chorus, keeping the vertical threads taut. Each weight swings a little when she reaches in, the pendulum's nodding at her competence. She dips 2 fingers in oil and smooths a squeak on the heddle rod, the smallest anointing, and the loom thanks her with silence. It's your lamp's wick all over again, a drop of fruit persuading a tool to behave. She glances at you, amusement in the corner of her mouth, as if to say, yes. The goddess of crafts appreciates W.D. Olive, mainstream anchor for your evening brain. Athena's city weaves her a garment, a peplos. During the Panathenaea, a festival of measured steps and civic pride, women pattern the cloth with scenes of gods and giants, and the finished fabric climbs the Acropolis like a calm sunrise. Loom weights just like these turn up in excavations of modest houses. They're the archaeological equivalent of crumbs in a toaster, evidence of daily, steady work. You finger one of the weights with permission and feel the cool clay, cousin to the amphora energy you keep admiring round. Useful, sure of its job. Listen. The weaver says, not loud enough to scare the threads. You close your eyes. The room becomes a slow machine built from small agreements, foot on treadle. Bar lifts, weft slips through, beater settles wood on wood, the sound of thought attending itself. The creak is not complaint. It's the hinge of intention. You can't help it. You imagine Athena herself leaning an ear at this same angle, hearing leverage hidden in everyday chores, a beam on a peg, a weight on a rope, a press waiting to be born, not from thunder, but from that one small, polite syllable of wood. You tuck the leaf in your sandal a little deeper, thank you. Shrine ante. And move along to where a fisherman is repairing a net. His hands are a language you almost understand: over, under, through, tug. And a knot settles with the satisfaction of a problem that remembers its solution. He nods at a pot of oil nearby. Better knots when the line doesn't squeak, he says, and gives the cord a breath of gloss. He also spits for luck, which is either science, theater, or both. You decide the sample size is large and the placebo effect tastes like salt in your ongoing Olympics. This is the sport of pretending you know not names. You meddle in nodding. An anecdotal morsel from key gossip, the sort that sails on the same breeze as the smoothing waves trick old-timers claim octopuses teach bad fishermen where to tie the best knots by stealing their bait and leaving a helpful tangle behind. This is charming, unlikely, and exactly the kind of story that makes a net feel like a classroom. You set it on the same shelf as the brine egg that floats like a lazy moon, and the laurel leaf that trains flavor to behave. Tonight's library is well stocked in friendly nonsense. A boy demonstrates a lever by moving a stubborn crate with a plank and a stone. He rides the far end for a triumphant inch as the crate surrenders. The creak that follows is the same tone as the looms. The same counsel you heard from the press frame waiting in the courtyard. Place your weight. Let the beam translate you. He grins. and the grin asks the most profitable question in the history of chores. What else could this move? If I gave it patience. Remember the cart on the road. Amphorae bumping their owl-stamped necks together like old friends. Imagine lifting one gently with a bar instead of a back. Wisdom often arrives disguised as laziness, upgraded to engineering. Historians still argue whether the earliest Athenian presses squeezed olives with a simple beam and weight rig alone, or whether wooden screws were already turning in some workshops during the classical period, with the screw press becoming truly common only in the Hellenistic centuries. You don't referee, you eavesdrop on timbers. Your ear tells you that long before anyone carved a mighty screw, people knew exactly how to ask a plank to lean for them. The myth doesn't care about patents. It cares about attention, the kind that hears a creak and reads it like a sentence. Across the lane, a rope maker twists fibers into line the way a baker braided challah in your imagination earlier. He runs the twist between oiled fingers, and the rope sings a higher note, slicked into good manners. He tells you, as if discussing weather, that a smear of oil saves skin and temper. It is the same domestic charm the woman used on the loom, the same thumb's worth you rubbed on your flask cork, the same drop used to calm a squeaky door hinge until it purrs like a cat that just got a promotion to CFO of naps. Tools. You're learning. Are acquire. Oil is the tuning fork. You try a hand at the loom. Under supervision. Your first pass is a tiny scandal. The weft snags its own foot and sulks. You breathe. Copy the weaver's unhurried cadence. And on the second try, the shuttle slides as if it has remembered childhood. The beater swings and the cloth accepts its next line. It is nothing like checking a screen, and everything like teaching your thoughts to line up and whisper. You consider leaving a review, 5 stars. Would weave again. Fell asleep midway. Side event in your Olympics. Letting your mind be boring on purpose. World record pace. The weaver speaks of a fringe practice her grandmother swore by it of setting a tiny owl charm near the loom so the pattern stays awake. Less attested. Ant approved. Very on brand for a city that stamps owls on coins and jars. She taps the charm's head, and threads behave. Or at least she smiles as if they do. You think of the owl on your flask and feel enrolled in a quiet club whose dues are paid in noticing. Mainstream note to tuck into your pocket, simple machines levers, wedges, pulleys show up everywhere here, even if nobody writes their names in capital letters yet. Door bars, boat capstans, stone lifters under construction ramps, the levered torsion of a bow drill that coaxes fire from friction. All of them are knowledge that moved in sandals. Archimedes will get famous later, but his principles are already busy under these ordinary roofs. Knowledge rarely arrives wearing trumpets. It usually shows up in a workshop with a smudge on its cheek, saying, "Try this." The creak changes pitch by a breath. You follow it to a courtyard with a wooden frame sunning itself like a sleepy animal. A crossbeam sits ready. A rope pulley hangs like a question mark. A basket of stones waits, polite as guests. You don't pull anything yet in this section, you're still listening, but you rest your hand on the beam and feel the stored stiffness. The way a board remembers treehood and agrees to translate vertical desire into horizontal persuasion. You can almost hear Athena's voice the way you could smell the fennel in the brine present. Patient, unimpressed by hurry. Place your weight, she would say, and let the wood do the math. Someone mentions lightly over the fence that a few pressmen swear singing to the press keeps the drip steady. It's probably correlation dressed as theater, but you enjoy the image, a human lullaby persuading olives to confess. Another swears by rubbing a dab of oil on the knot that holds the weight stone so the rope won't sulk. This one at least matches your growing thesis that fruit is the politest mediator in this city. You file both under friendly rituals with zero downside, alongside complimenting brine jars and wearing leaf and sandal for endurance. A goat wanders in from central casting, chews a broom with commitment, and inspects the beam as if considering a consultancy. It butts the post once lightly. The post declines to negotiate. The goat shrugs in perfect Greek and drifts away. You laugh under your breath. The 3-laugh minimum for 1,000 words is safe, and feel your ribs expand like a bellows again. Somewhere, the ledger clerk turns a page at the speed of geology. Somewhere, the harbor polishes its brushed metal face. Somewhere, your fan at home continues its white noise diplomacy, a long-distance cousin to all this creaking consent. You roll your shoulders, and the creak lines up with your breath. In, out, as if the frame has chosen to be your metronome. The sun finds the dust in the air and writes gentle constellations between the rope fibers. You remember the egg that floats when the brine is right and decide that patience also has a buoyancy test if your shoulders float slightly lower than your ears. You're doing it right. You pass. You resist the heroic urge to invent a new step. Instead, you honor the outline of the day. Listen first. Build next. Press later because the myth is clear when you don't skip ahead. Also because the cat on the rafters has written no rushing in its HR manual. Back at the loom, the weaver ties off a row and lets you feel the fabric, a firm kindness under your fingers. She smells faintly of oil, clean dust, and a courage that isn't loud. It's all levers, she says, and little weights. You nod, thinking of last night's softly lit council and this morning's chalky road. You think of lantern wick and laurel leaf, of owl stamp and amphora shoulders, of ropes eased by a smear and waves smoothed by a drop. Levers lift, knots hold, oil persuades. The creak is not a problem to fix. It's a teacher clearing her throat. You step back into the lane with your ear tuned to wood. The frame behind you settles. The net rustles like a low tide in string form, and the loom resumes its heartbeat thrum. Hush, thrum. Athena doesn't descend in armor. She arrives the way patience does, on a hinge, in a knot, with a drop of fruit convincing friction to be kind. You follow that sound toward what comes next, ready to stack stones, loop rope, and give your quiet weight to a beam that knows how to turn effort into something golden that behaves like light. You return to the frame and start with the easy heroics, picking up flat stones that look exactly like the coasters the earth made for itself. Their faces are cool and chalky. The edges nibble your palms. You set the first on the ground, then another atop it, with the soft ceramic kiss of weight meeting weight. A third slides into a sling of reed and rope that scratches your wrist like a cat pretending it doesn't love you. The beam above waits with the patience of furniture that has outlived arguments, and the post beside it carries the shiny bruise of use where hands, oil, and weather have sanded time into a thumbprint. The rope maker from earlier appears as if conjured by the word twist. He passes you a coil that still remembers his hands, a spiral of fibers smelling faintly of leaf and smoke. You loop it around the beam, where a smooth notch accepts it like a handshake. The notch is dark with history pitch, resin, the slow polish of years, so you tip a finger into a tiny dish and add one polite smear. The rope sighs. WD Olive for the win. Your fan at home would approve. It is a union shop where squeaks negotiate with kindness. You tie a hitch with the confidence of someone who medals in the Olympic sport of nodding as if you know not names. The weaver from next door glances over and humors your technique, adding a quiet surgical tuck that makes the knot look like it graduated. The stone sling hangs, attentive as a good dog. You give it a testing bounce. The frame replies with a low vowel, that friendly syllable you've been following since the loom breathed. When you ease your weight onto the beam, the crossbar answers by translating your body into patience. Your knees remember last night's metronome and oblige. Mainstream anchor, tucked gently into your breath. Early Greek olive presses often used a simple lever and weight system, a long wooden beam on a sturdy post, ropes and hanging stones applying steady pressure to baskets of crushed fruit. Basins cut in stone or broad jars underneath caught the expressed liquid. First the cloudy vegetation water, then, after settling, the calmer layer of oil rising to declare itself. You aren't inventing a machine. You're remembering one the city already knows by heart. You line the press bed with coarse mats, the kind braided from palm or rush, so the fruit paste won't squirm away when the squeeze begins. The fibers scratch your knuckles and ask for respect. Someone heaps in the bruised olives, not raw bitterness now, but fruit persuaded by grinding to open its doors. The fragrance lifts like a low green lantern cut grass. Pepper, the ghost of almond, exactly the scent the bees hinted at under the tree. Your mouth behaves itself this time. It has learned what patience tastes like. Anecdotal, less attested whisper from the neighborhood. Some pressmen tie a little laurel to the beam to keep the run steady. As if flavor listens to leaves, the way you tucked one into your sandal. Others sing to the rope so it doesn't sulk. The science is shy, the superstition confident. You decide both are harmless and possibly helpful, like complimenting a brine jar until it bubbles back. You knot a laurel sprig where the hitch hides and promise not to take credit if things go beautifully. You slide a flat board onto the stack, then a second mat, then more paste, building a tidy sandwich of future calm. The weaver passes you a small wooden platen, and you feel the grain under your thumb, the memory of tree turned into tool. The beam creaks an invitation. You step onto a footboard fixed near its end. Plant your sandal's leaf, still tucked endurance superstition engaged, and let your body become a slow hourglass. Weight trickles from bone to plank. The rope answers with a gentle tautness that tames the wobble into a lullaby. Your shoulders drift down a shelf. You breathe like a person who finally remembered where the low power mode lives. Historians still argue whether most pressing in classical Athens happened in household courtyards like this in small, seasonal bursts, or whether specialized communal installations handled the bulk, with families bringing fruit to professional setups. Archaeology shows both stories in pieces, basins here, post holes there, and the debate takes its time, which feels appropriate for a craft that refuses to hurry. You don't adjudicate, you listen to your own frame, which clearly votes for home can do a lot. The first persuasion is silent pace settling, mats adjusting, liquid beginning to think about not being shy, no drama, no applause, only the scent intensifying by a shade. The board under the stack shines in small, damp freckles. Not yet anything you'd call a drip, more like breath on a cold mirror. You keep your knees soft so the beam doesn't get ideas about bouncing. This is the patient squeeze. The outline promised you no spectacle, just pressure learning where to go. Another mainstream note slips in your pocket beside the owl-stamped flask. The earliest stages often yield watery juice with suspended solids. Oil rises after settling, sometimes overnight in jars or stone basins with channels. People learned to decant carefully, letting gravity do its favorite job. The process is domestic geology sediment, separation, stillness ending in something that behaves like lamplight when you pour it. The lamp from your first night clears its throat happily in memory. You call back your other minor miracles. A thumb of oil on a hinge that once scolded the dark. The brine egg that would float like a lazy moon when salt turned persuasive, the laurel leaf on the jar that looked decorative and perhaps also ambitious. This beam is their cousin's simple tool, simple promise. Your breath matches its arc in out, and the creak slides from wood to body like a teacher's hand on your shoulder saying there. The ledger clerk from the lane wanders in and pretends he came to help, then absolutely helps by writing press begun in his sandwich-sized book. He agrees that your knot is structurally optimistic, then winks and leaves it be. You adjust a coil to make him feel included. A child counts the mats 1, 2, definitely not skipping 2 this time, and awards you a pebble for excellence. You accept the pebble like a small diploma. Amphora energy in geologic form. Rope against wood talks in tiny notes. To keep the gossip cheerful, you touch another half drop of oil where the fibers rub. The sound quiets from cricket to cat. The rope maker, having the emotional range of fiber, nods with deep satisfaction and announces that fewer squeaks mean more sleep for neighbors. He might be right. The whole courtyard's acoustics feel tuned for naps, the way your room fan tuned yours back home. If anyone filmed this, it would be the world's most calming unboxing what's inside a mat, a board, a beam, a very supportive cast of olives. You add another stone to the sling. The beam bows a respect you can measure with your breath. Muscles along your back become a committee that finds consensus without shouting. The mats exhale a thin greenish moisture line, a scout of what will later become clarity. Not yet the pale gold you're smelling. That scene belongs to after the paste gives up its first arguments. For now, you stay with the leaning and the listening. It's the opposite of cliffhangers, an anti-plot where the point is exactly here. A neighbor mentions a fringy calendar custom press under a young moon, so the oil keeps It's a sweet superstition with travel miles. You've heard cousins of it in vineyards and in kitchens where pickles whisper to jars. Less attested, yes. Harmful, no. Charming, absolutely. You glance up. The sky offers ordinary daylight and declines to provide footnotes. You accept the editorial decision and keep leaning. Your sandals find the right grip on the footboard, and your leaf in sandal trick earns its cameo. No blister, no complaint. You smile, small and private. A callback folded like a napkin into the work. Remember how you once tried a raw olive and your mouth resigned. This time, the air itself tastes like training that finally paid off. Pepper without tantrum, meadow without hay fever, a green that has learned indoor voices. Another mainstream tether presses like this often used woven squirtons, later named in other languages, stacked to distribute pressure and allow the juice to escape. Whether these exact mats have that later name is a matter for philologists with excellent patience, but the principle is constant. Give liquid pathways. Don't let the fruit argue in clumps. The weaver pats one mat as if it were a reliable cousin. It is. The beam settles a breath deeper. Somewhere, a fly decides this is too wholesome and leaves. The goat returns, inspects your work, and endorses it by napping in the doorway, which in goat law is a contract signed in hay. You think again of Athena, not descended in armor, but arriving sideways through simple machines and careful hands, a goddess who teaches you to place, to wait, to listen. If wisdom were weather, she'd be the kind that makes laundry dry just right. Historians still argue whether the introduction of the screw mechanism in this region was an import that rapidly replaced the beam and weight style, or a long overlap where both coexisted, each loved for what it did best. The sentence you inhabit doesn't need the resolution. Your beam, your stones, your rope, these are sufficient to move a day gently forward. Later innovations can have their fanfare. Tonight prefers the hush of effort spread thin and wide. You check the knot once more, not because you distrust it, but because touching the rope is how you tell yourself you're here. The fibers are warm now, alive with the slow conversation between tree, hand, and fruit. You imagine the jars waiting in the shade, amphora shoulders, owl stamps blinking in cool air, patient as librarians with excellent bedtime stories. They will be ready when the first clarity arrives. For now, your job is the pleasant chore of not rushing. Someone brings bread only to smell, not to eat yet. A teaser trailer for evening. Oregano arrives like gossip. You make a joke about charging the press by the hour. The room awards you the world's softest courtesy laugh, which is the best kind because it also means we like you. You like them back without using your outside voice. You're not checking your phone. Training hits a new personal record. You don't even think about where your phone would be, if you had one, which you definitely don't, because this is Athens, and the only app is gravity. The beam finds equilibrium. You hold it, then let a little more weight solve a little more argument. The paste, now thoroughly reasoned with, rests under its blanket of mats and wood. The air has the faintest flick of spice, as if pepper decided to go to finishing school. Your shoulders slide down another notch. If you listen very carefully, you can hear nothing trying to become something. That's the lullaby behind every tool's hum in this city, from looms to nets to presses, long patience turning into use. Light shifts on the courtyard wall the way honey once pooled on stone by your lamp, and the shade cools by a syllable. You step off the board, just to see how the beam holds. It accepts the stone's opinion and continues to lean like a friend, saving your seat. You roll your ankles, breathe, and smooth the rope with your palm as if petting a helpful animal. No hurry. The first cold drip belongs to what comes next. This is the part where you stacked, looped, leaned, and taught wood to translate your soft weight into a steady, useful hush. You listen so hard you can hear the quiet make a decision. For a long half-minute, there is only the weight of the stones, the patient flex of rope, the mat's grassy breath. Then the press exhales a syllable you didn't know you were waiting for. Tick, and a bead appears at the lip of the board. Not a torrent, not even a trickle, just a single, glassy thought deciding to be born. It hangs, fat as a tear, and in that small gravity you smell the whole grove, again pepper and grass, a sly almond, the shade in liquid form. The bead lets go, kisses the plank, and becomes two. You grin at something no crowd would clap for. Your shoulders slide down one more shelf and discover there's still farther to go. Another bead follows, and another. They gather in a shallow groove you brushed with a thumb of WD olive, a tradition you just invented, and the beam endorsed with less squeak. The first thread of liquid darkens the wood, then lightens at the edges where it thins. And you realize this is the opposite of drama. It's competence. The scent arrives before the color changes a greener note that wakes your mouth without restarting its earlier rebellion. You set a clean bowl beneath the spout. The bowl is nothing fancy, just clay with the same amphora energy you've been quietly worshiping, rounded, reasonable, built to keep good things company. Mainstream anchor, settling itself like a sensible cat. What first comes off a press is mixed vegetation water and oil in an uneasy marriage. Because oil is lighter, it rises when given a calm hour, and people learn to decant patience in a jar. Gravity doing the bookkeeping. Later you'll pour off the pale layer that behaves like lamplight, and the darker water will go to the floor, or the pigs, or the compost heap, depending on whose aunt is in charge. Right now, though, you're watching a thought become a thread, then a thread become a ribbon, and the ribbon catch the bowl with a soft, surprisingly confident patter. The child who counted mats earlier leans in and counts drops until numbers quit cooperating and become commentary. The ledger clerk appears. Records first drip with the gravitas of a priest of practical things, and underlines it once. He sniffs, nods, and decides not to be in the way. The goat consultant parks itself in the doorway again, and, in a bold expansion of its job description, closes its eyes. This is what endorsement looks like when your board of directors eats weeds. You slide your palm under the bowl, not touching, just feeling the warmth collect in the air above it. It's not hot. It's the dustless warmth of something freshly decided. When you do lift the bowl a finger width, the base passes your other hand and breathes a little heat into your skin, and that heat travels up your wrists into the place where your pulse is always trying to get your attention. You cup the curve and let the drips drum a private rhythm. The sound is a cousin to your room fan's hush and the loom's thrum, a cousin who took a long bath and came to dinner on time. Anecdotal, less attested charm whispered by the weaver. Some families touch the first drop to the threshold, a bright fingerprint to tell the house, we did right by you. It's friendly folklore, more smile than citation. Still, the idea of the door wearing a little glint of patience pleases you. She also mentions a neighbor who dabbed the first oil on his sandals so his errands would glide. You look at your leaf-tucked strap and decide you've already committed to the genre. You give one knot a respectful smear. The knot purrs in its microscopic way and resigns from the squeak union. The flow strengthens. What was breath becomes a whisper, then a narrow ribbon. Not yet the steady hush of a stream, but enough to draw an honest line inside the bowl. You tilt your head and catch the color where it thins along the lip, not green, not yellow, something in between, like sunlight tasting a leaf. The room smells like an afternoon in miniature shaved pepper, cut meadow, the metal flower thing your fingers found under the tree. Even the goat looks impressed, which is to say it continues to nap. Historians still argue whether some ancient pressers here warmed the crushed paste a little by sun, by warm water on mats to coax more yield, or whether cold extraction, though our modern phrase doesn't quite fit their world, was the strict rule in houses like this. Texts hint, archaeology shrugs, and experts draw different maps on the same patients. You, allied with today's shade, keep the process unhurried and unheated, content with whatever kindness gravity decides to offer. You stir the bowl with a clean reed, not to mix but to welcome, then set it on the cool stone shelf where the house likes to rest jars. The surface gathers a soft sheen. When you bend close, the aroma rises like a low lantern, and for a luxurious second, you see your lamplight from the first night pooled on plaster, the same straw-colored mercy. Now in a bowl. You imagine this very oil laid into a small clay lamp later, wick sipping calmly, while your fan writes its circles, and your eyelids read the same paragraph twice, and forgives themselves. Mainstream note to fold into your pocket beside the owl stamp in Athens. Great quantities of oil were stored and traded, much of it traveling in amphorae marked for origin and measure, and prize amphorae for the Panathenaea were famously filled with oil wealth in liquid sleepiness. Your thumb rubs the little owl on your flask. Reflexive now, a secret handshake with the city's habit of turning patience into currency. Somewhere, amphora shoulders cool in a storeroom like a choir of terracotta lungs waiting for breath. You ladle a finger's worth of the mixture into a tiny cup and leave it to settle a science experiment with a bedtime. In a while, the line will be obvious, darker below, paler above. Later still, you'll tip the pail into a clean jar, the way you decant your thoughts when you refuse to check your phone and let the day sink out of them. Event update from the not checking your phone Olympics. You've achieved a personal best, forgetting where your phone would be, if it existed, which here it does not, because the only app installed in this courtyard is gravity. The rope hums a kinder note now that you offered it a thumb of oil, and the beam's arc feels like a breath you remember how to take. You add a small stone, not dramatic, just persuasive, and the ribbon answers by forgetting it's supposed to be shy. The mats exhale in neat syllables. You can almost believe the rumor that singing keeps the drip steady, though your version of singing is basically breathing on purpose and complimenting the bowl for its posture. It sits beautifully. You tell it so. It does not disagree. The weaver brings a scrap of linen, and you strain a spoonful through it into your palm, just to feel the tactility of patience. The thread lands warm and silk thin, slipping along your lifeline with the industry of a well-trained ant. Your skin becomes a little amphora, taking and holding, and then the oil vanishes into you, leaving a soft shine no mirror here will scold. You rub the last trace across the side of the bowl. Pottery loves a small kindness. Everything you touch today seems to remember being touched later and behave better, for it hinges. Ropes, knots, your own shoulders. Another mainstream tether olive oil lit homes and sanctuaries, dressed salads and wounds, softened leather and tempers. Athletes anointed themselves before scraping with strigils. Brides scented hair. Babies got shy kisses of it on wrists. It was not a luxury alone. It was infrastructure that smelled like pepper and light. You consider your infrastructure and decide it could use more naps and slightly fewer cliffhangers. This bowl is your policy proposal. In the doorway, sun turns dust into slow stars. The goat's ear flicks once to acknowledge the galaxy, and then demotes it. A fly hovers, reads the room, and chooses another career. The ledger clerk peeks back in to see if history needs an addendum. It doesn't, but he writes ribbon steady for the pleasure of underlining something that behaves. The child holds up the pebble diploma you earned earlier and says you may keep it if you promise to remember that patience is a verb. You accept the terms, sign with a nod, and put the pebble in your pocket where it clicks against the flask like a very tiny amphora, clapping politely. A friendly superstition from the rope maker, one he refuses to defend with data, says a drop of the new oil on a door hinge ensures a peaceful winter. Less attested. Aunt approved. Risk-free. You add it to your list. Somewhere between floating eggs and laurel-trained flavor. You can't fix the whole year tonight, but you can persuade one squeak to retire early. The hinge, flattered, says nothing at all, which is exactly the point. You swap the bowl for another and carry the warm one to the cool. The surface shows the faintest suggestion of two minds thinking together and slowly apart. Later, the pale top will pour like a miniature sunset into a flask. You picture your lamp at home humming quietly, your fan looping its air halo, and your breath matching a beam you cannot see. The outline of the day is keeping its promise: no cliffhangers, no crises, just the satisfaction of a first drip deciding to become evening. When you return to the beam, the laurel sprig at your knot has turned a little sideways, not wilting so much as relaxing. Like a worker leaning on a doorway at shift's end, you straighten it for morale and for the aesthetic. The beam, unoffended, creaks its small vowel again. You place your weight and feel the rope translate you into usefulness, into patience that isn't passive, into a craft that moves like a slow, generous clock. The room smells like a grove. The bowl warms your palms like a domestic sunrise, and the press keeps its promise steady, gentle, boring in the most beautiful way. Shade gathers round the jars like a well-behaved cloak, and you step into it with the relief of someone who has earned cool air by listening to wood. The amphorae wait along the wall in quiet ranks, shoulders broad, bellies calm, toes pointed like dancers at rest. Their necks touch now and then with a dry porcelain clink you can feel in your teeth, a polite sound. Nothing urgent like the fan in your room tapping a question mark into the night, and then deciding, never mind, you're fine. You run a finger along a rim and collect a watercolor of dust, olive scent, and pitch. Each jar wears a seal or a scar of a clay stopper pressed down and smeared with resin, then pinched shut with linen that has learned the shape of silence. You trace the impressions where thumbs once declared, enough, and find little signs scratched into the clay letters. Stars. An owl that looks suspiciously like the cousin of the stamp on your flask. Merchant marks arc across the lot like a tiny constellation chart, a dolphin here, a wreath there, a simple X that somehow contains an entire argument about ownership. You press your knuckle to one and feel the dried ridge, the durable handwriting of trade. Mainstream anchor hums in with the jar necks. Amphorae carry lives, oil, wine, grains, even salty fish ride these clay bodies from hillside to harbor to ship to market. Many arrive stamped or inked names of workshops, islands, measures, so someone downriver knows where the liquid light inside came from and how to price a bowl of it. Pitch and resin line the throats to keep flavors faithful. The pointed bases aren't a design flaw. They help jars nest upright in sand on storeroom floors and wedge steady in ship's racks, turning hulls into traveling cellars. You picture a hold full of these shapes and the slow percussion of jar on jar as the sea edits the day. Historians still argue whether all those stamps and painted notes on everyday Athenian oil jars served mainly as quality assurances and merchant branding, or whether they were first about taxes and quotas, a bureaucratic chorus marking who owed what to whom. Both readings have good posture. Both stand in this shade without shoving. You don't need a verdict to enjoy the cosmos of little signs catching the slant light like stars pinned to terracotta night. A boy, serious as a clerk with a sandwich-sized ledger, chalks numbers on the wall, today's tally, tomorrow's patience. He raps one jar lightly with a knuckle, listens, and nods as if it just recited its abstraction of weather. Less attested, friendly superstition lives here. Some families claim you can hear if a seal is honest by the jar's ring, that a true note promises no air leak and therefore no sulk in the oil. It's ant-approved physics at best, folk music at least. You tap too, and your jar answers in a tone that sounds like your fan at 2 a.m. Absolutely trustworthy. You lift a lid just one, with permission, and the room receives a second lamp. The smell rises green and pepper soft. The same meadow letter with a spicy pen you read at the first drip, now folded and sealed and forgotten on purpose in the cool. The oil's surface doesn't shout, it gazes back. A straw gold calm with a thin meniscus that catches light and decides to keep it. You could tilt this into a clay cup, let it make friends with oregano, and fix everything that is not actually broken. You don't. You're saving appetite for evening, and discipline looks briefly good on you. On several necks, you see tidy resin collars wherever fingers smoothed the sealant. Resin is old friendship, the same sticky kindness that keeps wine patient in its jar, the same gloss you smell on fresh coiled rope when a thumb persuades fibers to sing W.D. Olive's aromatic cousin. A potter shows you a stack of baked clay stoppers stamped with owls, grapes, letter pairs. He says the stamp saves arguments that mark is a promise, a breadcrumb back through the day to the hands that did the work. You nod, remembering the owl on your flask and the way your thumb has made a habit of checking it, the way your breath keeps checking the beam. The jars make shadows like vertical wells, cool and velvety. In those wells, a single fly changes careers and leaves. Dust floats in the not-quite sun, becoming a soft galaxy. The goat consultant walks through it, sniffs a stopper, and after a review process both thorough and illegal, approves the entire storeroom by choosing to nap in the doorway again. The CFO of naps is exceeding projections. You consider awarding the goat a tiny amphorae trophy and decide the goat already owns everything it wants. Mainstream tether, folded into the cool prize amphorae from city festivals, travel with black figure Athena painted tall and formal, filled with oil that amounts to portable sunlight and civic pride. Transport jars, less glamorous, still wear stamps that map networks across islands' roads, Thasos, and company writing their names into handles like a resume. You run a fingertip along a handle and feel the stamp's shallow valley. 2 letters, then a symbol. It's a sentence short enough to memorize. I came from there. I weigh this. I promise that. You set your ear near a cluster of necks, and attention brings the world's volume knob down to a murmur. The faintest chime, glassy and slow, echoes your own pulse. A lane breeze makes the jars speak to each other in porcelain, like spoons dreaming. Someone laughs in the courtyard with that hollow amphorae sound you've come to love, set down clay that says, "We trust the floor." The laughter loops back through time to your first lamp's straw-colored halo on lime-washed stone, to your fan-writing circles, to your night-long decision to not check a phone that Athens kindly refuses to invent. Anecdotal side door into charm. A dockhand once told you he paints a tiny eye in clay, slip under an amphorae handle when loading ships, to keep seasick jars from complaining and caps from loosening in swell. It's not in any handbook, and data does not apply. But the painted pupil feels like a nod to every owl and dolphin stamped here. A joke the jars tell the sea. You file it next to the brine egg that floats when salt gets friendly, the laurel sprig that trains flavor to behave, and the habit of complimenting bowls until they pour their best selves. A hand-sized scale hangs from a peg, 2 shallow pans. Strings slicked with a whisper of oil so the needles don't quarrel. The merchant demonstrates with a small weight that looks like a stone that learned math. He adds a splash from a measuring ladle, and the pointer decides on a middle path. It's the same game as your beam and knots place. Balance, weight, adjust a choreography that declines to raise anyone's heart rate. You relish the click at 0, like the quiet you felt when the first drop admitted gravity had an argument. Historians still argue whether Athens kept the very best oil from sacred groves like the Morii for temple use and prize jars exclusively, or whether that story was an ideal later polished into civic myth, while actual amphorae mixed sources more pragmatically. The archival voices lean both ways. The jars keep their counsel. Your nose votes for good enough to feed a city and a lamp, which is plenty for today. You notice each jar's toe a neat point that disappears into a ring of sand on the floor. The sand remembers ship holds and workshops. It cup hugs the toes so the jars stand like trustworthy friends in a crowd. You smooth the ring with your sandal and recall the leaf tucked under the strap. Endurance superstition still doing its quiet job. No blisters, no news, just feet that learned a chalky road and kept their promise to return. At the far end, a shadowy alcove holds a row of small single-serve jugs, domestic cousins to the big travelers. A woman inks dates along their shoulders a month. A moon sketch. A line. Less attested family practice says oil remembers the moon it's sealed under and behaves like that sky. New moon for fresh bite. Full moon for mellow grace. Science yawns. Superstition smiles. Flavor doesn't mind being complimented by art. You draw a tiny crescent on your palm with a dusty finger because it feels good to belong to a patiently silly club. You lift one jug just enough to feel its pledge of weight. It's the opposite of suspense. You know exactly what's inside and that it will be kind. The stopper creaks as if starting to tell a joke and then thinks better of it. You rub a trace of new oil around the lip hinges aren't the only things that purr for fruit, and the sound goes to sleep. Somewhere a broom shooshes the ground. Somewhere your imaginary ledger clerk writes amphorae content and draws an owl in the margin, then pretends he didn't. On your way out of the shade, you pause to admire the constellations again, merchant stars. Ferrying stories instead of light. A dolphin stamped yesterday sits beside an owl impressed last season, and two painted letters lean together like friends who've agreed to share a bench during a long sermon. The jars clink softly, not a warning, not a complaint, just the reasonable music of clay that has decided to hold a city's patience without drama. You touch the nearest seal with the back of your fingers, the way you tested the first warm bowl, and the cool says keep going. The day is long enough. The shadows will follow. When you step back into the courtyard, the beam is still leaning like a sentence that knows it's ending. The laurel sprig at your knot has relaxed from junior foreman to friendly intern. Your hands smell like pepper and pitch. Your pockets hold a pebble diploma and a quiet thumbprint of oil. If you line up your day by the evidence brine that learns manners, ropes that choose civility, jars that keep secrets, stamps that map a sky, you get a simple report. Everything boring on purpose is beautiful on purpose. You nod, because nodding is your best event. And the amphorae clink once more like a blessing you can hear. Evening sits down before you do. The courtyard turns the day down to low. Lamps wake with small golden vowels, and the air takes on that toasted hush that means bread is nearby. You set a shallow dish on the table and pour a ribbon of fresh oil, the same patient brightness you coaxed from the beam, letting it pool until light seems to rest in a bowl. Pepper tickles your nose. Oregano joins. A dry green whisper. A grain of salt snaps like a shy constellation. Somewhere, the goat auditor signs off on another nap with a long exhale, quarterly calm exceeding projections. You tear the first piece of bread with your hands because knives are for problems, and this is not one. The crumb yields warm and soft, steam-speaking wheat in a language even your shoulders understand. You tilt the torn face into the dish and watch the oil climb by capillary politeness, find the valleys, and settle. A miniature sunrise soaked into a landscape of crust and cloud. When your teeth join the meeting, the oil answers in pepper and meadow, the bread answers in sugar and toast, and your jaw does that surprised, yes it did, when the first drip kissed the plank. Your fan at home would approve. This is the edible version of white noise. Mainstream anchor arrives with the plate for most Athenians. The evening deepnon is the main meal bread at its heart. Relishes opsin around it. Barley cakes, maza, show up often. Wheat artos when fortune indulges you. Oil softens, glosses, binds. Herbs like thyme and oregano step in like quiet ants who know exactly what to say. Cheese, olives civilized by brine and patience, onions, and figs drift through the spread like friendly footnotes. You eat the lecture and remember none of the words. Only the point simple things are on purpose. A neighbor lowers a clay cup and asks about the press. You give the short version stones, rope, and a laurel sprig that learned management. He nods the nod of someone who has listened to wood at dusk. A child plunks down a plate of wrinkled, dry, salted olives, those cousins from the grandmother's basket method, and names them senior citizens of snack. You trade for a corner of bread and a pinch of salt. The goat opens one eye, evaluates the exchange rate, and returns to its professional silence. You promise yourself a tiny amphorae trophy for that animal later. The budget approves. A quirky, less attested charm makes the round the baker's wife swears if you sprinkle sesame clockwise 3 times over the shared dish. Talk stays kind all evening. It's aunt-approved meteorology for weather in a room. You oblige, watching the seeds fall like pale comets. And nobody objects. Your ledger clerk, moonlighting as maitre d', records conversation forecast warm, low wind. He underlines it once, then draws an owl he pretends not to have drawn. The dish glows a little richer for the theater. Listen, courtyards have a tempo. Someone laughs across the lane with that hollow amphorae sound you've learned to trust. A liar tests a scale and gets bored of excellence halfway through, preferring to match the lamp's gentle breathing. A broom shushes the ground into good behavior. You dip again, and the oil climbs the bread like a calm tide. Remember the raw olive fiasco from earlier tonight is the apology tour, the same fruit. Now schooled by brine and your beam, chooses diplomacy over drama. Your mouth signs a peace treaty and adds a clause about seconds. Historians still argue whether ordinary Athenians in houses like this mostly sat on stools or chairs for their deepnon, while reserving reclining on couches for the symposium and for the more formal, wealthier circles, or whether the custom of reclining blurred into wider practice earlier than the texts suggest. You pull up the seat that fits your knees and let the debate pass like a good cloud. Your back votes for not making a performance of dinner. You lean, you dip, you nod. The owl's stamp on your flask blinks politely in the lamplight, like it's heard this argument before. You reach for a dish of soft cheese streaked with honey and thyme. Swipe your bread through, and stack flavors without raising anyone's blood pressure. Oil smooths the conversation between sweet and tang, and a cracked olive from your jar adds its small adult bitterness, the way a friend adds a useful however midway through a story. Oregano throws confetti and then pretends it wasn't invited. You remember complimenting the brine jar until it bubbled back and grin. Maybe flavor like rope. Likes to be spoken to kindly. Mainstream tether to tuck beside your pebbled diploma. Communal ovens are common. Not every home keeps a fire hot all day. Loaves queue at neighborhood hearths. Return home stamped or notched so nobody hosts the wrong crust. Bread and oil together are infrastructure, not garnish the edible lamp and the liquid light. You tear another piece and consider that infrastructure is just a fancy word for things that keep you human and calm, which tonight includes sitting down and choosing boredom with grace. Lamps tilt their little golden heads and agree. The oil you strained earlier takes fire with no fuss and throws that straw-colored approval across lime-washed walls. The same tone that kept your first night kind. A moth attends the symposium uninvited, circles the lamp exactly once like a polite guest doing laps, then decides the fan you don't have is somewhere else, and leaves. Your shoulders, already 2 tax brackets lower than Monday. Negotiate a third. If you invent a sport called not checking your phone again, you podium just by remembering it doesn't exist here. In local news, your inbox has been crushed by silence. Film at never. Another plate arrives, lentils with a friendly drizzle, garlic crushed into surrender, a dash of vinegar that reminds the oil how to sing harmony. You rotate the bread through flavors slowly, like turning pages so quietly the story forgets you're reading it. The bowl empties without any of you deciding that you did it. The child announces this is because sesame clockwise worked. The ledger clerk writes control group needed and then doodles a fish. You are in a lab where the peer review process is nodding until nobody disagrees. A neighbor shares a fringe house custom before the first bite. Touch bread to the threshold and say, for anyone delayed, it's less attested, sweet as figs, and harmless as water. So the loaf gets a brief audition as social worker. You remember dabbing the first drop on the knot earlier, and like that, the house keeps being invited to dinner. Buildings here aren't backdrops. They collaborate, hinges purring, stoppers sighing, broom whispering, jars holding their breath just enough to keep arguments out. You lean back, not recumbent, just comfortably hinged, and notice how the oil on your plate reflects the lamp as a soft, trembling moon. A float test you learned for brine egg, rising like a lazy moon, winks from memory. And you enjoy that even your superstitions have continuity. The bowl glows the way the amphorae glowed in shade, the way the trough gleamed when the first ribbon found its gate, the way your wrist warmed under the first bright thread. Different rooms, same weather-patient gold behaving like light. Another mainstream note pads in with the loaves. Bakers sent dough with sesame, and sometimes brush tops with oil, so crusts color handsomely. Cooks finish vegetables the same way, because fruit can be a verb. Oil for lamps, oil for bread, oil for skin. One clever tree paying rent in a dozen currencies. You dab a little on your knuckles out of habit, and the skin says thank you in a dialect only your pulse understands. Practical glamour is your favorite kind. Talk slows to the pace at which olives ripen. A story about a boat becomes a weather report, becomes a plan to borrow a mat tomorrow, becomes a silence that doesn't demand to be filled. You take another piece, share it without counting, and feel the day's outline behaving beautifully. No cliffhangers, just arrivals. The laurel sprig at your knot in the press has probably relaxed further by now. The rope, polished by that thumb of W.D. Olive, is likely dreaming of easier work. You send them a mental compliment across the wall. Tools like mail. Finally, because even calm nights enjoy ceremonies, you draft a tiny ritual of your own, the last torn corner to the oil one more time, a grain or two of salt, a whisper of oregano, and a quiet wish that tomorrow's press sings the same note as today. Less attested, peer-reviewed by the people at your table, and immediately adopted. The goat snores, the lamp hums, the ledger clerk draws another owl. Your jaw unclenches, your eyelids rehearse. Bread makes you better at listening. Oil makes you better at patience. Evening makes both taste like permission. You rest your forearms on the table the way the beam rested its weight on the rope, and think how many small, boring miracles conspired to make this bite behave exactly right. The owl on your flask watches the meniscus in the lamp and approves. Or maybe that's just the flame making approval-shaped shadows. Either way, you take another slow breath, let it out, and the courtyard answers with the softest applause, spoons settling, a chair foot inching, a jar neck clinking once like a friendly star. You leave the table without leaving the calm, letting bread and oil walk with you as a mood. The lane answers in soft vowels lamp after lamp, lifting tiny suns into clay mouths, glassless and kind. At the first corner, a shrine waits where the wall indents into a shallow little house. A nice coast the size of a generous book. Lamplight trembles there, honey-colored, the exact tone from your first night that made the plaster glow like warm milk. A twist of wool hangs beside a palm-sized terracotta, maybe a tiny owl, maybe a woman with a basket, both looking like good intentions fired to a low gloss. Smoke trails lazily up and writes its single sentence on cool air, then changes its mind and goes nowhere. Laurel brushes your shoulder where a fresh wreath leans above the niche. It smells green and faintly medicinal sun-bright leaf, cooling down for the evening. Someone has tucked 2 olives into the wreath like punctuation, and a fingertip of oil beads along one leaf, as if the tree itself attended and signed. You think of your laurel sprig tied to the press knot and permit yourself a ridiculous belief that plants consider their careers transferable. If a leaf can keep a drip steady, it can certainly keep a corner friendly. Your inner ledger clerk, never truly off-duty, notes laurel multi-role employee and underlines it once. A side path slopes toward another small altar, a rounded stone polished by hands more than weather. You touch it with the back of your fingers the way you tested the first warm bowl, and the stone gives you the same patient temperature, not cold, not warm, simply willing. A clay saucer in front pools a drop or two of oil, a liquid petition that glows like a small moon fallen to earth. Mainstream anchor settles in quietly. Roadside shrines and household altars are everywhere in this city, marks of boundaries. Thank yous to Hermes at corners. Little stations for Athena and neighborhood gods kept bright with oil. garlands, and steady human errands. Lamps sip, thresholds gleam, and even wood and cloth images inside big temples get a caretaker's attention polished with oil so time behaves and the grain doesn't forget itself. Down the block, a slow drumbeat fades like a heartbeat leaning into sleep. Not parade loud, just a hand on skin keeping a walking pace where the lane widens. You don't chase it. You let it leave a breadcrumb of rhythm behind. Your feet copy, heel then toe, as if you're moving on the Panathenaic way at 3/4 speed. A cat crosses with executive privilege. The broom in someone's courtyard shushes the ground into obedience, your recurring chorus, while a moth unspools the tiniest figure 8 around a lamp and picks a different thesis. Under another wreath, a whisper of resin turns the night piney. A woman in doorway silhouette renews the wick by pinching, then dips 2 fingers in oil and smooths the squeak on a hinge so her door will learn to be reasonable. W.D. Olive, universal diplomat. She sees you see, and you both smile like members of a club with no dues besides patience. The hinge purrs. The moth, slightly impressed, files a memo. A quirky, less attested bit the wreath hanger shares without breaking her rhythm if you tuck a small laurel sprig under your pillow on the first cool night of the season. You'll dream answers instead of worries. Apollo gets the laurel press most days, she admits with a shrug, but dreams don't carry badges at border checkpoints. The right leaf can commute. You file it beside the brine egg that floats like a lazy moon, the door threshold crumb for anyone delayed, and the sesame clockwise forecast that earned you such kind conversation. Your pillow will smell like the grove pepper for logic, laurel for relief. Science won't write a letter. Your sleep might. A shrine to Hermes stands at the next corner, a square pillar with a kindly bearded head up top, road-worn and well-garlanded. Someone set a tiny clay shoe at its base, and next to it a doll-sized ladder with 5 rungs. The offerings look like punchlines and read like prayers. May feet travel safely. May steps climb without argument. Olive leaves flicker in the lamplight like fish in shallow water. And a little pot of oil waits with a sprig floating. Uncle approved. You whisper thanks to a god of roads for a day that kept every path boring in the best way. Historians still argue whether the great cloth woven for Athena the Peplos you felt in the loom room was always hoisted like a sail on the famous wheeled ship cart in the Panathenaic procession, or whether that shipmast pageantry was a later flourish, layered onto an older ritual of simply dressing the ancient wooden image, Zoanon, on the Acropolis. Some sources point one way, some another. The festival changed over centuries the way all good routines learn new manners. The debate stays respectful in the dusk. Your feet do not choose sides. They choose the softest stones. A dog escorts you 3 doors, then clocks out, satisfied that your not checking your phone training remains elite. Tonight's medal ceremony features a laurel wreath that smells like cologne you could actually live with. In a tiny square, 2 boys practice a festival drum with a caution you admire, a rap, a touch, a hush. They oil the drumhead lightly with their palms, and the leather answers with a deeper, kinder tone. Music here, like rope and hinge and wick, becomes hospitable when fruit joins the conversation. Further along, A small shop keeps idols on a shelf, a quiet crowd of terracotta owls, doves, hands extended in blessing. The shopkeeper dusts with a feather and occasionally strokes a figure with an oil-tipped cloth the way you might coax a wooden spoon to last forever. The smell is the same one that rose from your bowl earlier: pepper, meadow, clean work. He tells you confidentially, and with no expectation of footnotes, that rubbing a dot of fresh oil on a figurine's base helps wishes not slip off the counter. You accept the charm for what it is: a housekeeping technique for the mind. The night has its own amphora energy rounded, sure, built for keeping quiet in a useful shape. You pass a tiny sanctuary with a laurel tree trained into an arch. Leaves comb your hair with green light. A boy refills a lamp there, touches the first drop to the threshold the way the weaver said some families do, and the doorway accepts the glint like a wink. You remember the press's first bead and how it warmed your wrist. And you feel the same small ceremony at your skin's edge, now a city teaching itself how to be kind. Drop by drop, another mainstream tether pads in laurel crowns bless victors at Apollo's Pythian games. Olive crowns, wild olive from Olympia, rest on brows at the Olympic festival. Athens pours her pride into oil itself and paints Athena on prize amphorae, proof that light can be currency. You imagine shelves of those jars in some cool room, and your ledger clerk losing his mind with joy, drawing owls in the margins until the reed pen begs for mercy. He is very calm about it, naturally. All his exclamation points are whisper-sized. Past a gate, a courtyard shrine looks almost domestic enough to be your own: a simple stone, a pinch of barley, a small bowl that remembers earlier light. You set one sesame seed in it because clockwise worked before, and you're a sucker for repeated kindness. The goat CFO glides by a shadow with hooves, stops, blinks, and decides this donation passes audit. You issue it a micro-amphora trophy in your imagination and promise to place it on a shelf between the pebble diploma and the invisible owl you dotted in dust. You listen hard and catch layers: the loom's faraway thrum reduced to rumor, the harbor exhaling metal under moon, the brush of laurel, the lamp's wet whisper, the same tiny sound your bowl made when the first ribbon began to be itself. Your breath arranges them into a sort of lullaby, with no ambition to be a song. Corners in this city keep making sense: a niche for attention, a wreath for shade, a saucer for patience. You are not being tested. You are being invited to walk at the speed of understanding. Another less attested whisper: an ant swears that if a laurel wreath sheds a leaf in front of you, you'll find the answer to a question you didn't know you were asking before tomorrow's second cup of water. This is as falsifiable as a cloud. But you like the idea of answers arriving with leaf-shaped punctuation. A leaf does fall because leaves fall spins once and lands on your shoulder like the world's quietest epaulet. You take the promotion. Your new rank is Officer of Soft Footsteps. By the time you loop back toward home, the shrines have all chosen their night brightness. The thresholds gleam where oil-kissed stone. Hinges behave like good neighbors. And Laurel keeps volunteering to touch your left sleeve exactly when your thoughts try standing up too fast. You pass the press beam holding steady under its laurel intern, and the rope gives a friendly almost asleep creak that your breathing answers without trying. Someone has set a small dish near the knot with 2 olives and a crumb. You salute the dish with the solemnity of a professor emeritus of nodding. The last shrine before your door holds only a cup of water that mirrors the moon in a wobbly rock glass way. You look once and decide that the moon tonight is the same color as oil spread thin on bread, a thought your stomach signs off on with restraint. Your hand finds your door, the hinge purrs. The room receives you like a jar receiving calm. The fan you left running writes its quiet question marks again and, as always, decides not to need answers. Laurel scent stows itself in your hair. The lamp repeats the old straw-colored promise without raising its voice. You set your pebble diploma on the ledge, whisper thank you to the shrines in general, and feel the night write your name on the guest list of sleep. You stand where the key turns from stone to idea, a long edge of moon laid gently on water. Sails slacken like tired lungs. Rigging gives a lazy cough. The wind steps down from speech to whisper. Amphorae rest in rows along the pier, their pointed toes cupped in rings of sand. Shoulders glossy where moonlight pours itself and decides to stay. Ropes exhale resin and salt. Tar holds a memory of sun the way your lime-washed wall did on night 1, when the lamp's straw-colored approval made even plaster feel useful. The ledger clerk has changed venues but not personalities. He balances on a bollard with a booklet barely larger than your hand, adding lines that sound like lullabies. Tally, tally, rest. He underlines a dolphin mark here, an owl stamp there, mapping a constellation of jars to names. A small breeze lifts the page corner and decides against turning it. Your pebble diploma clicks in your pocket to remind you you've done enough today to deserve soft noises. You do not check your phone. The sea doesn't own one. And it's winning. A merchant sits on a coiled hawser like a man sitting on an uncoiled thought. He taps a seal with his thumbnail until it answers in terracotta polite, hollow. Sure. He's the kind to oil a knot before it squeaks. W.D. Olive has reached the waterfront, and when he does, the rope's complaint retires as if given a pension. He nods at your laurel sprig memory like he can smell the press on your sleeve. You nod back, fluent in the day's dialect of patience and fruit. Mainstream anchor settles beside your ankle like a cat. Athens works the sea through Piraeus. Its deep, sheltered harbor, network, emporion, and ship sheds. Storehouses and stalls where medics, citizens, and foreigners trade under officials who police weights and measures. The Etesian winds, those summer northerlies, govern schedules. Captains plan departures like farmers plan rain. Round-bellied merchant ships idle here, while sleek triremes sleep elsewhere. Oars stacked like closed fans. Grain comes in, oil and pots go out, and the quay learns new names nightly. Sails frown into folds, masts tick. A yard creaks the friendly vowel you first heard in the loom and then in the press. The sound threads the night together, wood-speaking hinge, and your breath automatically copies it the way it copied the beam. The moon combs a silver part into the road of water between the comb's teeth. Faint fish write punctuation. You trail a palm along a line of amphorae and recognize stamps like old neighbors, the owl that blinked on your flask. The wreath you saw at a shrine, a pair of letters that feel like a handshake. Pitch collars smell faintly piney. A ship's boy wipes one rim with an oiled rag until the rag learns the jar's curve. Moonlight pools in the wiped arc like water in a thumbprint. Clean lips keep promises. His captain says sanitation, poetry, or both. You place it on the shelf with the brine egg that floats like a lazy moon, and the sesame clockwise forecast for kind conversation. Historians still argue whether most merchant bustle truly clustered at Cantheros, while Zea and Munichia were reserved for warships throughout the classical century, or whether the division was blurrier seasonal, political, opportunistic, so that freight, recruits, and oarsmen braided through all three harbors as needed. The stone remembers none of our categories. It holds footprints without captions. You accept the uncertainty like a soft wind and keep listening. A less attested dockside trick rides the breeze. Some stevedores swear that tucking a copper coin into the netting round an amphora discourages theft too jingling, too obvious, while others claim the ring of copper against clay makes the jar remember its weight and keep the scale honest. There are no citations, only nods. The scale on a crate answers with equanimity after a discreet thumb of oil at its pivot. Needles, like hinges, want to be believed. The merchant cracks a waxed tablet and shows the day's clean math names, volumes, a neat mark where the decate, the harbor tax, has been noted. He taps one entry with a stylus and laughs about a boat that swore it had only figs when even its shadow smelled like fish. The wind tells on you, he says, and the breeze, mildly offended, pretends innocence. Your inner clerk awards the joke one owl in the margin and draws a fish for fairness. A trireme's profile slides beyond the mole, barely light on water, long, lean, built for morning speed, not midnight gossip. Its oarports are shut like eyelids. Closer in, a rounder hull dozes with a cargo net hugged to its waist, a belly full of jars you recognize from your own patient press. The thought that today's drip might tomorrow ride a deck like this arrives with no hurry and no ambition. It's just a possible path for a liquid that knows how to be light. Wind fingers a loose sheet, and the boat answers in papery whispers. You smell rope, fish, pitch, and a background green. You now always notice the olive's ghost visiting any place with tools. Someone slaps a coil into flatter obedience and then rubs the sore spot on his palm with a dot from a tiny vial. Your wrist remembers the first drip warming it. Your door remembers the hinge that purrs. Your sandals remember the leaf that kept them civilized through dust and mats. Cities are long strings of remembered kindnesses. A pair of medics traders who live here without the legal status of citizens argue silently with their hands about whether to risk a dawn departure if the Etesians hold. One draws the north with a finger, the other builds a wave with his palm and knocks it softly against the edge of a chalked map on his crate. They agree to disagree politely and eat a fig. The fig chooses a side by falling toward the map's safe harbor and dissolving the argument in sugar. Democracy in action. With produce. You watch a porter set a jar's toe into a wooden rack on deck. 2 sockets bored for the points, a quick nest that keeps bellies from quarreling in swell. He hums the rope maker's tune over, under, through, tug, and rubs a sliver of reed with oil where clay might chafe. Fruit keeps even wood polite. The ledger clerk, who has been pretending not to notice you noticing him all evening, offers an opinion on your pebble diploma. Promote it to paperweight. He places it on the corner of his booklet, and the page stops its little wave. Your pebble goes professional. He writes breeze variable, ledgers calm, which is not a category but should be. You salute with the gravitas of a person who has eaten sesame clockwise. Sails shiver and then relax again. Somewhere on the outer breakwater, a watchman taps wood on stone. 3 even beats spaced like breaths. The harbor, having rehearsed, chooses to do nothing grand. You look down the quay where amphorae line up like low moons and consider the gravity of ordinary vessels they hold. They pour. They wait. They say when. Your lamp at home pours a smaller version of this quiet. Your fan writes circles. Your breath, dependable colleague, files tonight under sufficient. A final breeze arranges the smell of the quay into a patient chord pitch. Fish, hemp, and that pepper-green overtone that followed you from the grove. You touch a stopper, pat a coil, nod at the ledger, and tuck the night into your pocket next to the pebble and the invisible owl you dotted in dust. When you turn from the water, the wind says, "See you," not goodbye. You answer by walking at the speed. The sea approves the speed of a person who has remembered that boring is beautiful, and that light, once poured, keeps its promise. Dawn doesn't arrive. It whispers. Roof lines turn from charcoal to paper. A kiln coughs a polite ember. Somewhere a rooster files a weak complaint and clocks out. You walk toward the quarter that smells like damp earth, waking up clay and ash. A mineral yawn. Potters are already at their benches, palms shining with slip, wrists doing that small round prayer you recognize from the loom. The press, and your fan's quiet circles at home. Wheels whisper on pivots. A hush-hush you feel in your shins. You sit, not to watch with your eyes first, but to let your hands learn by osmosis, which is the official teaching method here. A potter nods you closer. He wedges a clay lump with the rhythm of a person kneading out yesterday's weatherfold. Press, quarter turn, repeat. The sound is low thunder trapped in dough. He drops the mass dead center on the wheel with a confident plop you admire, like good punctuation. His foot begins its slow civic duty, making circles the way you breathed under the press beam, steady, unseen, persuasive. Center, he says, but he mostly means touch. And your hands understand before your ears do. Clay under your palm pushes back, not stubborn, just honest. When you lean a fraction, it agrees a fraction. This is the same treaty you signed with rope and wood, rewritten in mud. Mainstream anchor slides in with the first lift Athenian potters throw on wheels and fire in updraft kilns. 2-chambered firebox below. Vessels above managing air and heat in a 3-act play oxidize, reduce, reoxidize. The famous black and red aren't paints, but chemistry. A fine levigated clay slip turns glossy black where oxygen is withheld and returns to orange where it's not. It's a kiln ballet performed by artisans who read flame like a ledger. The jar you admired last night, stamped with an owl, is a cousin to this morning spinning future, same bones. Different costume. The wheel hums the note you've been chasing for days. Your potter oils the central pivot with a thumb of, you guessed it, WD olive. The squeak resigns and goes to work at a quieter job. You grin, inducted once again into the universal union of fruit that solves friction. He grins back without stopping the world from turning beneath his hands. The clay rises between his fingers like calm bread, remembering it's mostly water and confidence. In the next bay, a woman slips a brush through diluted clay and writes an owl so quickly you barely catch the eyes form. She laughs at your surprise and says the bird is muscle memory from 1,000 handles stamped and painted. Your pebbled diploma shifts in your pocket as if trying to see. Everything wants to be round this morning, she adds. You think of amphorae energy bellies. Sure, shoulders ready, and nod. Your best event nod. Medal update from the not checking your phone. Olympics, you have invented a new discipline called rotational appreciation. You're breaking records by doing absolutely nothing novel. From the carpenter's shed at the lane's edge, a different sound leans into the chorus. Not the vowel creak of the loom, not the syllable of the press beam, but a deeper, threaded groan wood, complaining with admiration. You turn and see a post and beam frame wearing a new hat, a wooden screw, fat as your wrist, seated through a crossbar with a hefty nut. Two men turn a long handle. The screw climbs down with gravitas, a spiral convinced of its destiny. The pressed jaw kisses a stack of mats and boards, exactly like yours. Only now persuasion arrives by turning instead of leaning. The sound it makes einen feels like a patient thundercloud rolling through your rib cage. Historians still argue whether large wooden screw presses were familiar sights in everyday Athenian workshops of this century, or whether such mechanisms truly claimed the stage in Hellenistic and Roman times, with earlier households relying mostly on lever and weight rigs and wedges. The debate walks through inscriptions and stones and never quite sits down. You wave to it from your stool and continue learning by touch. Your day has already proven that a beam and patience make gold. The new screw is a neighbor with promising manners, even if the paperwork on its arrival date remains in committee. The carpenter cranks once more. The thread sinks a finger width, and the mats release a polite exhale. Someone has rubbed the screw with a mix of oil and powder olive teaching wood to like rotation, and the groan smooths into a whale-sized purr. The potter beside you chuckles. Good for grapes, good for olives, good for claiming you invented tomorrow, she says. It's an upgrade in choreography, not a repudiation of your beam's lullaby. Both methods translate kindness into pressure, both call for patience, both smell like pepper and light when they behave. Back at the wheel, your potter lifts the wall of a bowl and sets you to the basic miracle. Keep your elbows home. Breathe. Let your thumbs argue gently with the center. Clay answers by becoming exactly as tall as your attention and no taller. A joke grows in the corner of your mouth. The kick wheel is the only spinning class you'd pay for to get sleepier, and you keep it because the morning isn't loud enough for applause. A kid appears to count your revolutions and stops at 4 because that's as high as numbers need to go before breakfast. A kiln worker checks the firebox with a shard used as a thermometer by color. He adds fuel and steals a glance at a small string tied across a peephole, his makeshift gauge to ensure the reduction phase is truly starving the chamber of air. Mainstream tether-attic kilns can run near 1,000 degrees Celsius. Potters learn to read the atmosphere with eyes, ears, and the smell of hot clay. He offers your nostrils the quick education metallic damp, then a sweet earth aftertaste as the flame shifts. You nod, pretend to understand, and then genuinely do. At least in the way your breath evens out to match decisions your brain can't footnote yet. Anecdotal, less attested charm circulates with the first tea-colored light. Some swear a pinch of ground olive leaves tossed into the fire at the start brings the gloss up true because the tree likes to watch. Others tuck a laurel sprig behind the kiln vent so smoke remembers the way out. Nobody writes this down. Everybody has an aunt. You file both next to sesame clockwise over the shared dish and the brine egg that floats like a lazy moon. Your pockets are becoming a museum of friendly nonsense, curated by your pebble. The carpenter's screw complains once, less fiercely now, as the handle turns. The sound threads through wheel hum and kiln breath like bass through a lullaby. You step closer and put a hand on the post. Vibration climbs your bones with a polite handshake. The pressman taps a wedge under the bed for parallel, a technique your body recognizes from earlier, a syllable in the grammar of pressure. He catches your eye and lifts an eyebrow. Want a turn? You pass. Not from fear, but because today your assignment is absorption. Your palms are already full of lessons, and clay is not finished telling you how hands become measuring cups for patience. The potter plucks a brush and paints the faintest slip line on your turning bowl. Your fingers feel the ridge before you see it. Signposts, she says, for where the wall becomes a lip. The kiln sighs. A bird tries one note and decides it's too early for scales. Across the lane, a woman oils a strap on her sandal. Your leaf, still tucked in yours, has kept silent, faithful while the goat CFO clocks in with a yawn so large it counts as strategy. Quarterly NAP forecasts remain robust. The board approves increased laurel spending. A second mainstream note settles at your elbow. The Keramakos Athens Potters District mixes graves and workshops. An everyday braid of life and ceremony. Clay digs become both studio and cemetery. Vases carry wine to symposia and offerings to the dead. You run your thumb along the damp rim and think about containers as contracts. We agree to hold this. We agree to pour that. We agree to remember. Amphorae energy is, apparently, also metaphysics. From the corner, a young assistant demonstrates trimming a leather-hard pot on a slow wheel. A looped blade whispering shavings like terracotta ribbons onto the floor. He oils the axle with a drop to keep the song low. Better shavings when the wheel doesn't argue, he says, proving that every craft here walks arm in arm with the olive. You ask if anyone ever compliments the pots so they dry better. He answers gravely that his grandmother does. And her vessels rarely warp. Peer review continues to be largely nod-based, with excellent results. Historians still argue whether the dominant wheel form in these shops for this era was primarily kick-driven with a heavy flywheel or hand-turned via an upper plate with a helper stick. Different workshops preferring different rigs. Sherds and depictions hint both ways. The debate rotates as faithfully as the wheels themselves. Your foot, having found a comfortable rhythm on a nearby treadle, decides the only correct answer is the one that lets the morning stay this quiet. The carpenter's screw makes one last dignified descent for the set, then rests. In the lull, you hear the kiln shift into its third act, air returning to the chamber like a careful librarian switching lamps back on. The slip-painted owl on the drying board starts to look less like a doodle and more like a promise. You wash your hands in a basin that catches the morning and makes it silver. The water beads on your skin, then runs off in small, patient threads you've seen before, on a beam, in a bowl, along a jar's inner wall. Everything echoes, nothing repeats. Before you go, the potter hands you your bowl, still soft, still spinning memory. Name it, she says, which is potter talk for remember this lesson. You call it useful silence. She approves, stamps a tiny owl under the foot hello again, old friend, and sets it on a board to dry among cups and jugs like a class waiting for their first nap time. The kiln breathes like a sleeping animal. The screw press across the lane dreams in spirals. Your sandals, leaf still tucked, register 0 complaints. The fan at home is probably writing its circles. The lamp will be ready with its straw-colored mercy. The press will remember your weight without needing it yet. You step back into the tray of early light and tuck the morning where you've been storing everything along your ribs, in your wrists, under your tongue. Tools here keep proving the same thesis in different dialects. Pressure plus patience equals kindness. You can pour. Whether a beam leans or a screw groans, whether a wheel kicks or glides by hand, the lesson is delivered through your fingertips and not your arguments. You nod gold medal behavior and follow the smell of cooling clay toward whatever steady chore volunteers to be next. Hearth smoke keeps its promises. It rises in a soft gray ribbon that smells of olive wood and thyme stems saved from supper, and it threads itself through the rafters without hurry, drawing a faint line you could follow even with your eyes half closed. You settle on a low stool with your knees at a polite angle, warm on one side, cool on the other, like you've been seated between 2 well-behaved seasons. The coals talk in miniature commas. Someone nudges a pot into the glow, and a spoon clinks the rim with the quiet confidence of a tool that knows the evening is already handled. The house circles you without moving wall niches with a sprig of laurel and a thumbprint of oil, a basket with bread's last heel waiting for an encore in the pan. Your pebble diploma doing sturdy paperweight duty on a folded cloth, the ledger clerk would be proud. You breathe in the smoke, which smells faintly peppered because even fire here remembers olives, and you recognize the city's whole thesis arriving in vapor small, repeated kindnesses turning into comfort. Your fan at home would call it ambient diplomacy. Your lamp's straw-colored mercy would nod from the windowsill. Mainstream anchor sits down with you on the hearthstone in Greek houses. The hearth, Hestia's constant seat, is the center that blesses entrances and farewells. New brides and newborns are ritually introduced here. Travelers bring a little flame from the city's public hearth when founding colonies. The first and last drops of wine or oil can belong to this fire as a thank you for keeping the roof on the day. You feel the formality without stiffness, just a room remembering how to be family, even when the family is 2 neighbors and a goat CFO who has wandered in for the audit and immediately fallen asleep. Steam carries tiny stories. A woman stirs lentils, then leans the spoon against the pot, the way a harpist leans a hand against the strings. Did you hear about Makarios's lucky knot, she asks. Not because you should have, but because gossip is a kind of bread. She holds up a loop of red thread around her wrist, 2 turns, 3 tucks, and touches it with a finger dabbed in oil. Stops the eye from staring holes through your day, she says, meaning the evil eye, meaning ordinary bad luck. It is less attested, cheerfully Aunt approved. She half winks. The oil keeps the knot from shrinking with sweat. W.D. Olive remains the city's universal truce-maker, now in jewelry. A second neighbor arrives, trailing clean laundry warmth, and sits to mend. Thread whispering in and out. Remember your brine egg, she says, as if the egg could hear us from its moonlit duties. Mine floated like a gossip and then sank the day I forgot to compliment the jar. You grin, because the compliment ritual has become this neighborhood's unofficial peer review. The jar, somewhere in her courtyard, is no doubt busy becoming polite again. You file both charms, the red thread knot and the talkative egg, on the shelf with sesame clockwise and the laurel sprig that keeps press strips even. The pot burps one slow bubble and goes quiet. A child, all ankles and sincerity, holds up a stitched packet of herbs. For the cough, they announce, as if inventing medicine on the spot. Inside is fennel, thyme, and a peel of citrus, tied with string and anointed with the smallest drop of oil so the fibers won't fight. It's a kitchen remedy, as old as gossip and twice as useful. Mainstream truth adds its spoon-tap olive oil here, carries salves mixed with beeswax for skin, with wine and resin for poultices applied to bruises, dryness, and the chafed places of sandals that forgot to learn from your leaf. You massage a trace into your knuckle where the press rope marked you earlier, and your skin translates it as a reminder to unclench. Historians still argue whether most Athenian homes kept a distinct, strictly segregated women's quarter, the gyneconitis, as a fixed architectural rule, or whether that neat division on later floor plans reflects more an ideal of rhetoric than the messy shared traffic of rooms where cooking, weaving, and talking overlapped. Excavations hint both ways. Doorways say it depends. You note the debate the way you note the smoke's path present, unhurried, not demanding a verdict before bread toasts. Stories at the hearth have low stakes on purpose. A neighbor swears a sailor returned with a tale of smoothing choppy seas by dribbling a thimble of oil from the stern. Your earlier rumor with new stitches. Only on small water, he said, and only to help the boat remember flat. Another woman, this one with Needle Queen energy, adds that painting a tiny owl in soot under a pan makes porridge refuse to scorch. This is gloriously fringe, blessed by 0 tablets and 1 ant. Still, she's been feeding people for decades, and the pan's bottom is suspiciously innocent. You imagine the invisible owl under there, first eye dotted with the very first drip, like the pressman's old uncle ritual, and decide that believing it costs nothing and saves pots. A gust tugs the smoke ladder sideways. Someone pats the hinge with a dot of oil habit now, like breathing, and the door remembers civility. The hinge purrs. A goat hears it in sleep and upgrades the nap forecast. The child asks about your laurel sprig on the press knot and whether the beam is still singing. It is. You say, because you can feel the frame through the wall like a neighbor's heartbeat. A slow song. You almost add, it knows our names. But that would be the kind of myth that gets you promoted to CFO of sentimentality, and the goat already has the corner office. A mainstream tether sidles in with the steam. Many households kept a small, movable brazier, the tripod of embers carried to rooms as needed, while the main hearth stayed the ritual heart. Ash had chores, too, whitening door thresholds for festivals, sealing jar lids, polishing wood, even starring in the stronger lye baths that some people use to hurry bitterness out of olives before the brine finishes the job. The woman with the lentils nods at the ash bucket with the respect of a colleague. You nod along. Nothing in this city is unemployed, least of all patience. You offer your best event nod when the mender shows off a neat wrist loop for thread, a weaver's trick turned sewing hack. Lucky not, she says, then lowers her voice to the pitch secrets prefer. My grandmother spat not at me. Heavens, but near, 3 times before tying it, to make the stitch start obedient. It's a tender superstition with comic timing. You file it gently beside the leaf in your sandal and the threshold crumb for anyone delayed. Your not checking your phone training reaches a personal record when you realize you've been here an hour counting only stitches and breaths. A pot lid settles with the same soft syllable the press beam made when you first leaned into it. You can't help hearing Athena in that sound again. Not armored, not loud, just a goddess of noticing, of small engineering, of making friction and time shake hands. Someone asks you to tell the short version of why a beam and stones can be smarter than strength, and you demonstrate with a spoon under a cup and a pebble diploma on top lift here. Settle there. Wait. The spoon squeaks. You rub a kiss of oil on its neck. The squeak retires. The table murmurs approval in the amphorae register you've come to adore. Historians still argue whether household hearths like this vented mostly through dedicated smoke hoods and flues, or simply bled their breath through doorways and roof tiles. The balance changing by neighborhood, season, and renovation budget. The rafters above you make the case for a bit of both. A faint smudge records winters. A patch of brighter plaster remembers last spring's repair. The argument, like the smoke, finds a way out without banging pans. Anecdotal, less attested practice shared in a whisper before a child's first day carrying water. Some families dip the new bucket's rim in oil and tie on a red thread so the handle won't bite. Is it physics? Is it psychology? Does it matter when the child walks smoother? The kid at the hearth preens at the thought of being the subject of such cosmic engineering and asks immediately to carry something, anything, even air. You assign them the job of counting breaths until the pot says stop. They reach 3 and declare the mission complete. Character development continues. Someone toasts the last slice of yesterday's loaf in a shallow puddle of oil. The surface ripples like a small, well-behaved lake. Oregano falls in a soft constellation clockwise. 3 circles because the evening has chosen to be kind again. The bread answers in quiet crackle. You remember Section 9's olive apology tour, the first drip warming your wrist, the jars clinking like polite stars in shade, and the amphorae on the quay standing on pointed toes in rings of sand. Every story tonight has a cousin steamed to smoke, knot to knot, lamp to hearth, press to spoon. Your sandals register only gratitude leaf still tucked, endurance superstition thriving. A neighbor asks where you learned to listen to wood. You say a goddess taught me to hear hinges, which gets the correct kind of laugh, not loud, but long-lived. The goat opens one eye as if to check your citation, then returns to quarterly projections. The lamp adds a gentle vowel to the room. By the time the pot resigns itself to being done, the smoke has written a thin novel overhead, and every page ends with the same sentence: be steady, be kind, don't rush. You share the bowl in silent spoonfuls, even the fringe stories quiet for chewing. You press a crumb to the threshold for anyone delayed and leave a drop of oil on the door as a bonus clause in the house's peace treaty. The hinge purrs, the laurel near the niche leans, and the owl stamped under your soft clay bowl. Remember, Section 12 winks from the drying board in your mind. Before you stand, you add your own small rumor to the shelf of friendly nonsense. If you breathe with the press, the soup never boils over. It's untestable and obviously true tonight. Peer review nods around the hearth. You step into the cooler half of the room, carry the calm like a bowl whose surface you refuse to spill, and understand that gossip here isn't about other people. It's about patience, shared in sips, until the day agrees to sleep. By the time the hearth's last ember rolls into gray, the grove is already drafting the next paragraph. You walk the familiar path at the pace of sap, unhurried, present tense, and the trees greet you with that pepper-green breath that remembers your wrists from the press. Leaves flash silver underneath when the breeze arranges them. The same old bees clock in with their salary hum. You lay a hand on bark that has learned both thunder and threadbare summers, and it greets you like a well-read friend, rough, cool, ready to explain everything slowly. Seasons here are not separate rooms. They're a single chamber with the windows turning. Winter trims, spring whispers, summer ripens, autumn kneels with baskets. You fold yourself into the cycle like a mat under the press platen, useful by being there. First, the pruning, you lift a small hooked blade that fits your palm the way the loom shuttle fit your fingers, and you edit the branches, not like a zealot, but like a librarian removing duplicate sentences. Dead shoots go, crowded spurs get space, air and light learn the way back in. Mainstream anchor pads in beside your wrist. The Mediterranean harvest usually shows itself late autumn into winter. Nets are spread, poles tap branches with a polite percussion, and fruit rains like small, glossy ideas, ready for the steady math of stones and rope. You've seen the end. Now you practice the beginning. You lay a cut twig on the wall, and sap beads at the wound like a tiny, deliberate tear. The smell is pepper plus green almond, the same letter written on your wrist by the first drip. You smear the blade with a dot of oil so it won't seize at the hinge. WD Olive as field gospel, and the tool agrees to be civilized. Your sandal's leaf still tucked. Superstition thriving find quiet purchase among last year's leaves. Each one a curled boat retired from service. The goat CFO wanders by with a time card in its eyes, audits a clump of grass, and approves the fiscal year of nap ahead. Spring rehearses itself as buds the size of grains of salt. You stand very still so you can feel a tree thinking. Desires uncrumple along the twigs. Tiny clusters consider becoming flowers. Bees sketch the neighborhood like cartographers of fragrance. You remember sesame sprinkled clockwise over the oil dish, and you circle the grove in the same direction because repetition is how you tell time to keep being kind. A neighbor ties a red thread under a branch to keep the flies from finding the baby fruit. A charming, less attested trick that sits comfortably beside the brine egg that floats like a lazy moon, and the threshold crumb for anyone delayed. Every aunt in Attica swears by a different color. You shrug and admire the confidence of rituals that cost 1 arm's length of string and a smile. Historians still argue whether Solon's famous regulations truly forbade exporting anything except olive oil, or whether later writers flattered an ideal policy into legend while the real laws were narrower, addressing sacred groves and measures more than blanket bans. The debate feels like a breeze that can't make up its mind. The trees do not wait on footnotes. You place your attention where the facts wear leaves. Tiny stars open along the twigs, cream white with a hint of chartreuse, and the air leans in to read them. Summer keeps a hand on your shoulder so you don't stand up too fast. Shade becomes currency, and the grove mints coins in the shape of leaves. Tiny green fruit the size of peppercorns swell to peas, then to grapes without ambition. A mainstream note taps your sleeve. Olives often alternate bear, giving abundantly 1 year and resting the next. A rhythm farmers answer with pruning and kindness to balance effort and recovery. You nod your best event and try not to measure. Measuring is a winter sport. Summer's discipline is watching without keeping score. In the not checking your phone Olympics, this is the marquee event, staring at fruit until it becomes philosophy. You are a lock for gold. You clear fallen twigs. Check old terracing stones that keep soil from wandering downhill during rude rains, and smooth the crumbly edges with your sandal. A boy follows you with a broom made of laurel twigs, shushing the ground into better posture. He announces that if you sing the counting song to the olives 1, 2, definitely not skipping 2, they'll ripen evenly. This is delightful, peer-reviewed by no one but a goat and a cousin. You sing anyway. The bees adjust the key a fraction and accept you into the band. By late summer, the olives darken in shades, some staying green-gold, some deciding on bruise purple, some going all the way to night. You press one gently and feel firm resistance, the memory of bitterness that once made your mouth resign in Section 4. You respect it. The grove smells like a mortar of herbs after rain, and the heat writes wavering lines in the air like a scribe who has skipped lunch. You drink water that tastes like shade and pat your leaf-tucked strap, a superstition now indistinguishable from footwear ergonomics. The owl on your flask blinks at the sun and pretends it meant to. Autumn arrives wearing weather on its sleeve. Dawn comes later, with fog that erases distances and gives you the pleasure of rediscovering the same tree twice. You unfurl nets like patient green lakes beneath the branches. Poles tap, fruit thuds softly. Hands collect the fallen. You learn the footwork of not stepping on what you've just invited down, a gradient of grace that looks, from a distance, like a choreographed apology. Mainstream tether families and hired crews work in bands, moving methodically, keeping bruising minimal, ferrying baskets to the press before the day grows argumentative. Baskets rasp. Rope remembers your palm. Wood warms its vowel and waits to translate weight into kindness again. Another fringe belief floats in with the fog. Some tie a laurel ring to the first branch harvested so the wind will agree to behave. Others chalk a tiny owl on the trunk with limestone dust so wisdom watches our wrists. None of it carries footnotes. All of it carries comfort. You chalk the owl lightly. Dot the I with the first polite bead once the press begins, and feel the unnecessary generous symmetry of it settle your breath. Rain recalibrates the grove's voice, leaves hiss softly. Trunks exhale cold. Soil gives a low drum when your heel presses in. You stack wood cut from the season's pruning, imagining its future as hearth talk and soup permission. The cycle turns inventory into lullaby, branch to fuel, fuel to glow, glow to patience, patience to oil, oil to lamp, lamp to sleep. You recall the amphorae in shade owl constellations on their necks, and the jars on the quay standing on their toes in rings of sand, and the ledger clerk underlining the night with a reed pen that kept almost not writing. Winter doesn't scold here, it instructs. Sap slows. Leaves glitter less. Wind takes off its gloves and shows bones. You inspect for disease, for scales and borers, and you smear a finger of oil on a nicked spot as if kindness could travel through bark. It can't in that direction, but your hand warms. Placebo is also a civic good. You adjust straps, recoil ropes, kiss the hinge on a gate with the tiniest dot, WD Olive, always campaigning on a platform of less argument, and the gate purrs like a cat with stock options. The GOAT CFO posts robust winter nap guidance. You endorse the plan. When the sky clears cold and high, frost outlines each leaf like handwriting. The sun copies it away by noon. You file the image with other gentle spectacles, dust galaxies in the amphora room, the meniscus breathing in the jar, the first cold drip catching your pulse. Sesame comets falling clockwise across an evening dish. Your pebble diploma in your pocket clicks once the signal for fewer better, and you take it as permission to lean on a wall and listen to nothing for an honorable amount of time. Seasons are generous with callbacks. In pruning's cut, you hear the loom weight's measured nod. In Blossom's bees, you hear the fan at home writing circles. In summer's steady watching, you hear the rope shrug into its groove. In autumn's soft thuds, you hear bread settling when it decides to become crust. In winter's small repairs, you hear the hearth ladling comfort. Everything you learned about pressure, patience, and oil becomes a language you speak with your hands across the year. The olive answers by living long enough to remember you. Mainstream whisper, set gently among the leaves, some olives here are older than inscriptions. Their trunks spiraled into sculptures of time, throwing new shoots from old wood after fires like the sacred tree on the Acropolis was said to do green as a second thought. You rest your palm on a burl that looks like an eye and feel only wood, only weather, only a lesson too large for sentences and just right for naps. By the time you circle back toward the press, the beam remembers your weight the way a chair remembers your favorite slouch. The laurel sprig at the knot has crisped into a clean brown ribbon. You replace it with a fresh one because you enjoy the ceremony and because the knot likes company. The courtyard smells like clean wood and patient resin. A broom writes the ground into good behavior. A lamp indoors rehearses its straw-colored promise for evening. You tuck a small leaf into your sandal for the next walk, whether the next walk is an hour or a season away. You leave the grove knowing the calendar is a circle drawn slow enough to breathe. Nothing here hurries. Nothing stalls. Your job is to keep showing up with a blade that doesn't squeak, a rope that doesn't sulk, a jar that keeps secrets, and a patience that pours. Then, as sure as bees commute and owls watch, the tree will keep trading sunlight for usefulness at a rate the heart can sleep to. You nod gold medal and head home at the speed of sap, already tasting bread that hasn't been baked yet, and oil that hasn't been pressed yet. Certain they're on their way because the grove keeps its promises in loops. You return to the press because it keeps time the way your breathing prefers slow, useful, indifferent to applause. The beam remembers you, offers its familiar vowel, and waits for your weight the way a chair learns your best slouch. Laurel at the knot has turned crisp and dignified. You replace it with a fresh sprig, not because plants need HR, but because you enjoy a ceremony that costs a leaf and pays out in calm. Rope warms under your palm, the grain faint as a cat's purr, and the mats greet the day's stack like colleagues who know the agenda and approve. You build the sandwich again, paste, mat, board. Mat each layer an unhurried sentence. Stones in the sling lean their arguments into the beam. Your feet find the footboard. Your knees remember the hinge you practiced on the chalky road. When you ease your weight onto the plank, the whole frame exhales one syllable of permission, and the paste below answers in a language you've learned to read by scent pepper, grass, the faint metal flower of green almond. It isn't new, and it isn't old. It's present tense turned into liquid. Mainstream anchor rests in the corner like a well-behaved fact presses like this beam and waits. Wedges for fine-tuning run across the countryside, while, in busier yards, newer wooden screws take the stage, all of them chasing the same outcome, separate brightness from grit. Let gravity sort, and store the patient gold in jars that keep their promises. You've seen the amphorae lined up in cool shade, owl constellations on their necks. You've heard jar necks clink like polite stars and watched resin collars hold gossip out. The city system is just an echo chamber for this very sound creak. Hush. Drip. The first thread appears and finds its gate with less drama than yesterday, which feels like a compliment. You lift a bowl to the spout, and the warm ribbon lands with a discreet patter that tickles your pulse. Your hands are amphora again rounded, reasonable, built to keep good things company. The bowl gathers a shallow mirror, and you catch a faint portrait of your lamp's straw-colored mercy from night one, of your fan writing circles, of a goat CFO asleep on the line between shade and sunshine. Evening is already sending an RSVP with oregano on the envelope. Anecdotal, Less attested charm drifts in with the rope maker. He taps the beam 3 times before the first drop to wake the wood spirit, then gives the knot a kiss of oil so the spirit doesn't sulk. He grins, refuses to defend the science, and tells you his aunt insists a dot of first oil on a newborn's heel helps the child walk kindly. You file both in your museum of friendly nonsense, brine egg floating like a lazy moon, sesame clockwise for kind talk, threshold crumb for anyone delayed, laurel leaf under the pillow for calm dreams, exhibits that mostly tune the humans. Which is the useful part anyway? Historians still argue whether the story that Athena herself invented the press was ever told in classical Athens, or whether later writers, noticing how perfectly craft matches her portfolio, retrofitted the myth around the already revered tree. Some sources keep her gift to the olive itself. Others let her ear for hinges and levers sponsor the squeeze. The debate sits politely on a bench nearby while you do the work, and the beam, unimpressed by footnotes, translates leaning into usefulness. You take your weight off, make a tiny wedge adjustment under the bed, and step back on. Every nudge is a syllable. The paragraph reads patience. Your sandals leaf tucked, superstition thriving, hold their peace. The child who once skipped the number 2 now counts mats without errors. A local miracle you pretend not to celebrate aloud. The ledger clerk appears, writes steady on nothing in particular, and pretends it's a category. Your pebbled diploma does paperweight duty on the corner of a cloth and looks like it was born that way. Beneath the presswork, your mind sorts flavors of quiet. There's the Grove quiet pepper green, wing-stitched. There's amphora quiet cool, resin-scented, stamped with owls. There's hearth quiet smoke-laced, spoon-tempoed. There's key quiet rope, tar, and moon on water. And then there's an indoor weather system that rains gold at a rate small enough to make sense. You live best at this scale. You are a citizen of slow drips and decent knots and hinges that purr when you ask them to behave. Mainstream note tucks itself in like a respectful neighbor once decanted. The calm layer above the darker vegetation water will feed lamps, dress bread, gloss wood, and bless skin. Prize amphorae of oil top the list of gifts a city uses to say you did well at festivals. You picture a runner's shoulders shining in the same liquid that makes your door quieter. You picture a lamp taking a small breath of it and returning a room to forgiving. You realize how many kinds of light a single tree can fund. A breeze pushes the door. The hinge answers with therapy-level civility. Remember the day you dabbed it. Fruit keeps paying returns on social peace. The goat arrives, inspects the proceedings, and signs off by napping. Quarterly nap projections continue to outperform market expectations. You award it a mental amphora trophy and return to the beam, which has no interest in trophies and every interest in consistency. Another bowl fills. You swap it into the cool and watch the meniscus breathe when a drop lands a little rise. A little settle the jar version of your chest under a blanket. The surface begins to show 2 thoughts composing an agreement, paler on top, darker below. Later you'll pour the calm into a flask with an owl on its neck. Later you'll trace a circle of sesame in a dish and watch talk stay kind. Later you'll touch a single dot to the threshold for anyone delayed. The day is a queue of patient ceremonies, each of which works better for being boring on purpose. A fringe whisper from the weaver floats in a few households tap the beam at day's close and say, "Thank you to the wood for holding its shape." Not because beams keep score, but because people feel better when they do. You do it now, tap, 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 and the note that answers sounds like a door that promises to keep behaving. You catch yourself smiling with the small muscles. Historians still argue whether most attic houses used woven scortons by that very later name, or whether we're back projecting a label onto mats whose function, not their vocabulary, did the real work. The mats, agnostic about semantics, continue to exhale where they should. The screw press across the lane hums its whale-sized purr, and you do not feel threatened. Upgrades are neighbors, not villains. Both beams and screws serve the same quiet god of pressure. You step down once more, smooth the rope with your palm, and admire that your hand now smells like every room you love here: pepper from the grove, resin from amphorae, smoke from hearth, tar from key. You are stamped like a jar, labeled by use. If anyone asked for your origin, you could point at a beam, a loom weight, a wedge, a fan, a lamp, and a goat, and say here, without irony, bread will arrive later, and oil will say yes to it. Lamps will bloom like small moons in clay mouths. Your fan back home will write circles and decide, again, that no question needs answering tonight. The press slows to a final thoughtful drip. You wipe the spout with linen that smells like sun and listen for one last syllable from wood. It gives you the old vowel, and you echo it from the chest. And that is what a promise sounds like when it keeps itself. You tap the beam 3 times the way the rope maker does. For the wood spirit, for theater, for tradition with 0 paperwork. Then you set down the bowl in cool shade, touch a dot to the threshold because the house likes to be included, and nod your gold medal event at a day that has ended by becoming useful. The drop you dab on the hinge will keep the door polite through winter. The dot you'll taste on bread will keep your jaw honest. The rest you'll pour into a lamp that remembers how to forgive the room. Sediment settles. Light rises. You are as steady as the press, and as sleepy as you deserve to be. You ease back from the beam and let the room soften, as if someone gently lowered the sky by a hand's breadth and tucked it around your shoulders. Words thin out to edges, and edges blur into friendly shapes, the outline of a jar, the curve of a bowl, the line of a door that chooses to close kindly. The air keeps its green whisper, but farther away now. Like grass after rain in another yard, you can almost see. Breath smooths into longer lanes, in and out, like a tide small enough to lap at your wrist and then fall away without insisting. Light dims to a warm hush, the straw-colored tone you know. Smaller, nearer, quiet as a thought not yet needed. The fan at home writes its circles and then forgets to tell you about them. The goat, a silhouette folded into itself, relocates somewhere more comfortable without making a sound. The ledger clerk puts the reed away and leaves the page clean. Even the owl on your flask closes one eye so you'll remember less and rest more. You let the day collect itself at the bottom of the bowl, sediment finding its place the way your thoughts do when they're done being useful. Above it, A clear layer of calm rises. And that's the part you pour into this minute. Nothing urgent leans toward you. Nothing sharp asks to be held. The press is only a shape now, the beam only a line, the rope only a rumor of grain, and all of it is content to keep you, like water, keeps a reflected moon steady, while the real thing moves on without you watching. If you need a last thought, let it be, this very small one boring is beautiful on purpose. The hinge will continue to behave. The jar will continue to keep secrets. The tree will make light while you sleep. Your breath, even, especially now, remains your only task long, even gentle. And as the room steps one pace farther into quiet, you follow, loose-limbed, eyelids heavy, a name whispered by a friendly house that intends to keep you safe and sleeping until morning.